So you think you're an arts fan? Okay, Draco Malfoy. Can you handle this? It's the top grossing movies of 2001. Part 2. The totally crunk year that gave us these burning questions. Who put Topher Grace in my Brad Pitt movie?
The one thing is, and this is like just his thing and stupid, but I'd have to pay you by check. Or we could just stick to cash.
Does Sean Bean always have to die?
In fact, there is a website dedicated to your character's deaths called don'tkillseanbean.com.
Yes.
The website's front page reads, Sean Bean dies in everything, which is a shame because he is awesome. This blog is dedicated to ending the untimely deaths of Sean's characters in television and film. Help us save Sean Bean.
Oh, good. I didn't know about that.
Isn't that nice?
Promising, yeah.
And just how many teachers are trying to kill those kids at Hogwarts?
Why suffer an horrific death when you can join me and live?
Never!
Because you still use T9 to text your BFF. You have a list of movies so big and a season that has been so all over the place, you have to do something a little bit unconventional. In the lead up to this particular episode, I've had so many movies that, I don't know, I just put it like this. If you've ever seen footage of somebody who starts to have a manic episode on a plane and they start shrieking and crying and screaming and they have to be duct taped to a chair, or if they're still at the gate, maybe they were broken up with at the gate and they're going nuts. They're throwing a temper tantrum in the aisle. That's pretty much my mentality after most of this season, kicking off with the Police Academy films and then all the way through to like pretty much last week's just debacle of the bottom, 10 through 6 for 2001. Oh, awful movies. But then we did this 180. We did this pivot. And the gates of Rivendell opened up to me, and there was a elf witch on the outskirts of the woods, and she was beautiful, and she poured some liquid in the thing, and she said, bring in 2 guests, bring in 2 fan favorites, people you haven't heard in years at this point, bring them back to Binge Movies. First and foremost, Kat likes things, but she really loves things. Does she love the movies this week? Not sure. Welcome back, Catherine Gonzales.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Has it really been years since I've been on?
About 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
In the middle of your audio, which means nothing, straight from what some people call heaven, other people call Florida, Robert Yaniz Jr. Robert, you still got books down there, or what's the deal?
We're holding on to as many as we can. The bonfires keep happening every night, and we're trying to save the last vestiges of culture.
I was going to say, how soon before Governor DeSantis comes into your personal dwelling place and starts taking some of your body or DVD and Blu-rays?
Yeah, you ever seen the movie Equilibrium? It's kind of like that. We're like a year or 2 away, I think, from that.
Yeah,
so,
just make sure you keep taking your don't feel anything medicine in your neck or whatever. That way,
right.
You can't have any emotions. Yeah.
I have 2 small children. If I had emotions by now, I'd be dead. So.
But your child's going to be hiding his medicine behind the mirror, and he's going to teach you how to feel again, which is then you're going to have to then go to the capital of Florida, which I presume is Miami. Is Miami the capital?
No, it should be Miami, shouldn't it? No, it's Tallahassee, I guess. Yeah.
Never heard of Tallahassee. I've heard of Jacksonville, Florida. Is that your capital? I think you're wrong.
I'm pretty sure it's Tallahassee since I've lived here forever, but it's true.
I'm pretty sure you don't have I'm pretty sure you don't have an education system down there. So you don't know your capital. Where's the capital of Texas, Catherine?
Oh, I don't know either.
You guys still have books over there too, or are those next on the chopping block?
Yeah, pretty much. Rex, I think Rex just ate the last of them, so he's trying to protect us.
All right. So Catherine is living through a Last of Us situation thanks to a certain Governor Greg Abbott, and you're living
We have a
through
fungus coming.
Yeah. You're living through a equilibrium situation.
Exactly.
Down there. So it's dystopian as fuck in many places in America. We got to go back to maybe the last great year of American history. Of course, I'm talking about 2001. Who knew that 9/11 was going to be the peak of our civilization when that shit happened? But turns out it was. Let's go back to 2001. Let's start at number 5. We've got 5 amazing films for you, most of which I've already talked about on the internet. So hence 2 guests who have fresh opinions, fresh takes, people who are really good at this shit. So let's get started off with the 5th highest ranked movie of 2001 with a 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, the triumphant return of Steven Soderbergh. I'm talking about the coolest movie ever made. We'll find out. Ocean's 11.
What I'm about to propose to you is both highly lucrative and highly dangerous.
You want to knock over a casino?
150 million without breaking a sweat.
Smash and grab job, huh? Slightly more complicated than that. Oh.
Yeah. He'll kill you, and then he'll go to work on you.
Scared?
You suicidal?
You're a thief and a liar.
I only lied about being a thief.
Check the batteries?
Ocean's 11, rated PG-13, starts Friday, December 7th.
Ocean's 11 was directed by Steven Soderbergh. It was written by Ted Griffin. It is based on Ocean's 11 by Harry Brown, Charles Lederer, George Clayton Johnson. It's a triumphant return of George Clooney, not seen since the days of The Perfect Storm, which was about 5 episodes ago. It's a triumphant return of Brad Pitt, not seen since the days of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was about 2 episodes ago. It's a triumphant return of Julia Roberts, not seen since the days of Notting Hill. Kat, was that you? Were you on the Notting Hill episode, or am I wrong?
No.
It's a triumphant return of Matt Damon, not seen since the days of Robert. This ought to give you a shudder down your fucking spine. Saving Private Ryan. I'm waiting for the apology.
I wasn't the one that killed Rocky. I just helped Saving Private Ryan get to the fight. From what happens beyond that, it's, I wash my hands of it from that point.
You put it on the list, sir. You put it on the list. All right, and it's the triumphant return of Don Cheadle, not seen since the days of Avengers Endgame. This film was released December 7th, 2001 on a budget of $85 million. It made, listen to this, $450.7 million worldwide. 11 diverse grifters team up to prove the house doesn't always win. Every performance, every camera movement, every cut, every bit of dialogue is pure joy in this film.
Yeah. I didn't know if you were done or what was
I'm
going
done.
on.
Listen to that ecstasy. Listen to the rapture. Am I alone here?
Am I alone here?
No,
No.
not at all. I had a synopsis as well. I had
Oh, go ahead.
The era of the movie star goes out in a blaze of glory with a heist film that proves remake doesn't have to be a dirty word.
Kat, you got a synopsis for us?
I think when I learned that movies could be this cool.
Yeah. Fair.
I was 13, so when I first saw this,
yeah.
This was one of those movies where I was like, oh my goodness. And I just realized a lot of these movies on this list were like sort of took me to the next level of maybe my early film criticism career.
It took you from Air Force One to the next level of
yes,
film
exactly.
criticism. Yeah. Is this the last of actual star power in Hollywood?
It was really funny going back and watching these 5 movies from 2001 because it does feel like a turning point for Hollywood where movie stars start to take a backseat to franchises. I mean, just in this one alone, one of the podcasts I host is called Franchise Detours. All 5 of these movies either had a prequel, a spinoff, a sequel. Like these were all the beginnings of franchises. And it feels like this year is the same year that I think Tom Cruise was in Vanilla Sky, which is another movie that only went to 100 million because Tom Cruise's face was on the poster. And so this feels like very much the last gasp of having a cast like this in a movie like this and being sold pretty much just on the fact that it's George Clooney and Julia Roberts and Brad Pitt and Matt Damon and Andy Garcia in a movie. Not necessarily even, there was no built-in audience really for this. I mean, my mom and my aunt, who they're from New York, they love the Rat Pack, so I knew of the original movie from 1960, but I have never seen it, and I venture a guess that most people haven't seen it. It was kind of mixed reviews when that came out, and yet this completely reinvents that. And I don't know. I think it's partially the chemistry from these actors, and it's the script is so like flawless, so fine tuned. When you get to that scene where there's a specific scene with George Clooney and Julia Roberts when he confronts her at the restaurant, and it's just like fireworks constantly. Like it was as thrilling, if not more so, than like any big action sequence, because it's just two actors at the top of their game with like a top-notch script playing off of each other, and it was magical. That sequence was, and it's just two people sitting at a table, and this kind of movie doesn't happen anymore. It sounds like a cliche to say, but an adult movie for grown-ups that's about grown-ups just talking and doing their thing, and no CG and no effects like that. I think it's a dying art form.
You don't count Ocean's 8 towards that list?
I actually like Ocean's 8. I'm a defender of Ocean's 8. But yeah, but I mean, that came out, did well, and then people were like, yeah, no, we don't want that. Like, they just pushed it aside. Where's my Ocean's 9? I would be totally down for an Ocean's 9. I thought that movie was a lot of fun.
Kat, when you were 13 years old, did you have a lot of Frank Sinatra on your hit clips?
No, I didn't.
You didn't have a Rat Pack hit clip collection that you then inspired you to I really love the original Ocean's 11. I got to go down to my local mall and see the new version.
No, I don't even, because back then I don't even think I had the internet, so I couldn't just Google it. I would have had to go into the library and like figured that out.
Yeah.
But I remember watching it, and on the surface, it's the heist movie. That's exciting, I guess, as the kid part. But as I still remember like my brother being really into it, and he's not as into movies as I am, and like the whole family was into it, and we really loved watching this. And I remember getting the DVD and just watching it over and over again. And then as the years have gone by, I've like revisited every once in a while because I just loved it so much, and then revisited it for this episode. I was just struck how good it is, how I think I took it for granted all those years ago.
Yeah,
because
right.
you just were like, oh yeah, that was a good movie, whatever. And you're like, oh, that was a good movie. And and then you realize, because there has been there have been trying to do like, oh, let's just put all these mega stars in one movie and it's going to be amazing because you can look to this example. But then you realize that it takes a little bit more, there's a little bit more nuance to that. It's not putting all these superstars, sort of like when the basketball teams put all the superstars together and they're like, we're going to win. And it's not about that. So it definitely, you realize how much chemistry Ocean's 11, the cast had, how they all like played their role really well. No one's trying to do more, no one's trying to do less. They're just doing what they do really well. And then when I saw it, I was like, oh man, like George Clooney as like charismatic con man, like of course you believe him so much, it's just so good. And then Brad Pitt, his eating all the time and just like, it's just so good. And then I love that Andy Garcia, I mean, he was a staple in our family growing up with my mom, and we watching all his movies, so just seeing him as the very handsome person. But I didn't like that he would get screwed over by George Clooney, because it's like Julia Roberts, like that would be a hard choice, right? But and then when I was watching it this time, I also realized that while there is a little bit of spectacle to this, like I guess the marketing would have rallied in the superstar power of like, oh, come watch all these people, but all these years later, like 22 years later, it really is the substance that keeps it so good. Because I think that's what's lacking nowadays, is like people are like, let's just put all these people together, and then there's no substance. Like just those little lines, the way they're delivered, or the camera work, it feels so smooth, and yet there's a lot of edits and things, but it's just really like, it's really master craftsman at the peak. And I think that's why it held up. Like even watching it now, I was like, I almost felt sad, because I was like, why don't we have more of these movies right now? And you can see the movies that are trying to be like Ocean's 11, and they just fall short, unfortunately. So I love it still.
Kat, when you're not on film sets or at film festivals, hobnobbing with celebrities and directors, Do you ever just reach out to Steve and go, "How'd you do this, Steve?" I'm sure you have his phone number, don't you?
No, I wish. I don't even know. I think sometimes I think about like, what would I ask these people who like I love their
Yeah.
films, and I would just I don't know what I would ask because it's just they really is like starstruck, like maybe I would have, I would have obviously the obvious questions, but I would just be more in awe of like, how did you do this?
Well,
it's so good.
maybe this is because I'm not actually, like in the industry or connected to it in any way, shape, or form, coming from sunny tropical Akron, Ohio, which is basically oblivion. But I've always had the dream of, if I ever got to meet any of these people, I would talk to them only about either their most obscure films or their biggest failures. But I would be really excited about it. Be like, talk to me about whatever. Like,
what's actually a good thing that you could do, because just from my experience, is don't talk to them about their movies, talk to them about other people's movies, and then you'll see in those answers why, like, you'll get the answers you want for their movies in the way they talk about other movies that they
look
love.
at you. That's why you're a gamer. I would go, Julia, talk to me about Troy. What happened?
Yeah.
I think the thing that's great about this movie is, and upon this revisit, is that I came to this franchise pretty late, actually. I ended up watching all of them in a row, like one night. I was just like, you ever just get in one of those funks where you're just like, I'm not moving, and I'm just going to find something to watch. And then whatever you're watching kind of lifts your spirits, and you're like, I don't want this high to end. And there's two more of these things. And so it was like, okay. And it was like wintertime or whatever. I had the blahs. And so I ended up watching the whole trilogy. And I'd seen like parts and pieces of all of them, but to actually just sit down, really genuinely give them my full attention, I didn't do that till maybe about a decade ago. And what's great about this film is that it gets all of the major notes and minor notes correct. And I think both of you kind of alluded to that, where it's like, yeah, the bank heist stuff is cool, and the scenes that need to work to drive the plot forward, they all work, they're all cool. But literally, I don't want to say meaningless, but interstitial scenes, right? Like I think of two things. One is minor and one's real minor. One is when Clooney and Pitt are at the bar, and he's like, we got 10 guys. You think we need one more? And Pitt doesn't move. He doesn't blink. He's like laying his head on the bar and looking off, probably to a TV or something.
Makes 10.
And just the camera angle where it's kind of shot low and up. And then he's like, maybe we need one more. You think we need one more?
You think we need one more? All right, we'll get one more.
And just the timing of it, the pacing of it, the beat of it, and nothing has changed. Nothing. It's just such a cool execution of what could have been a pointless scene or just another scene in another movie. And I think so many movies, it's like, okay, they get the big parts right for the most part. They get the spectacle, like you were saying, Kath. They get the sizzle. But Soderbergh with this film takes the steak and also makes that sizzle, and takes the sizzle and also makes that steak. And another example, which is, again, really, really minor, is, yeah, we've seen Brad Pitt eat in every freaking scene of this movie, or, almost roundabout, right? It's just constantly something in his mouth or whatever, whatever. It's just the subtle note of, at the end, when he's at the prison, he finally gets heartburn. He's like, oh, like it's just like a split second. It's never addressed, and there's so many moments throughout this film. And almost, here's the thing: it's not just Pitt or Clooney or Garcia who get those moments. Bernie Mac gets moments like that. Everybody gets a little moment where, something that a continuous note they've played with that character has some kind of major or minor payoff. And we love all of these characters. Shout out to Bernie Mac, rest in peace, who's really great in this movie. None of this works without everybody. It's the entire ensemble that pulls it together. And as far as like film analysis goes, sometimes I get deep in the weeds with stuff, and presumably it's why people listen to a show like this, because I'm going to go deep into the weeds on Police Academy 5. But sometimes you don't need to go deep in the weeds. Sometimes the only analysis that suffices is, this is cool. This is good. This is entertaining. And that's what this film is. Masterful direction, like you were saying, Kat. Masterful performances. The movie is just good. The biggest surprise is not that the movie is good for me. It's that after 22 years, it's still good and it's still cool. Cool is something that's easy to capture in a moment.
Yeah.
So relatively speaking, I guess, but to be persistently cool for 22 years, to transcend your own time and place. I think part of it too, I guess we could speak to this, is the movie, other than a couple of the fashion choices, for the most part, the movie could have, because of the music, the score, the way it's shot, it doesn't really look like a 2001 film. It's its own thing. It doesn't look like a 60s film, although it's got some of that vibe with the music, the, casino jazz lounge music or whatever. But you could make this movie more or less today and it would be relatively the same.
Yeah, except Brad's like frosted tips.
Yeah, right. Yeah, some of the fashion, but also because these guys are like all con artists and grifters and weirdos, and they all like, maybe they would dress like this now. I don't know. Other than
they probably
tips.
would. Yeah, they probably would. Yeah, they probably would be try to live out their old era or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
but it feels so timeless. Like there are some things that will date it, like the technology or whatever. Like I was, it made me laugh seeing their like really advanced, like when they're going over the plans, and it's like the old Mac Windows thing.
Yes.
And I'm like, I was like thinking when I was watching that, I was like, oh man, this is so cool. So like things like that, but even that feels cool. And I like that what you're saying about everyone in this one. I think what movies don't get right when they try to do ensemble ones is they try to overdo it with everyone gets their shine, or some people don't get their shine because they don't know how to balance it out with like a super, the megastar. And here you had like, arguably a lot of superstars like George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, Andy Garcia, all of them, but it never felt like they were trying to compete with each other, and it felt like they gave them the right material where I guess they felt like they had enough substance in their own characters where they didn't have to be like, give me more screen time or give me this. And then every, sub character would have their own moments too. And it was just as important. And I think that's why it makes the movie so much richer with those nuances. And I think that's what it lacks today. I think people don't know how to do that, or they kind of lean in towards like the comedy that's not funny. It's like in those little moments, you don't have to make it funny. Like you said, Brad Pitt didn't do anything in that scene, and with George Clooney, but it's like we put those pieces together because it's so real in some ways, even though this is about stealing money from a casino, but we know those moments as humans. So I think it was just, I don't know, I love it so much. I wish it's just the finesse. I feel like, and that goes with being cool. People who are cool are not trying really hard. They're just cool. Yeah. And it's and how would you translate that into a movie? Because that's kind of a hard thing. But Soderbergh did that, and he wasn't trying too hard. I think that's why still 22 years later, it doesn't feel like overdone, because it is just what it is. It's just a good movie and it's cool.
Well, because the performances are charming and the performances are humorous. The dialogue doesn't necessarily need to be humorous. It's the performance, the execution that's humorous. And now everybody's trying to write quips. Everything's got to be quippy, like you said. It's just like, and it takes you out of the movie because it's either like breaking the fourth wall, or it's something that it's something that's not true to the character. I think now when they try to do this, you're hearing writers when people talk. It's like, oh, that's a script. That's a writer talking. That's a writer's perspective of the movie, where it's like, oh, whoa, because like, I hate to do it, but like Marvel is a great example. A lot of the lesser Marvel works, it's like, we got to be quippy, and everybody's got to sound like Robert Downey Jr., even though his character's now dead. But it's like everybody's trying to write every character to sound like that, and they're going to break the fourth wall, and they're going to like mention some controversy on the internet in the dialogue that these characters would, like in this situation, wouldn't even be thinking about. And so it's just here, everything that comes out of each one of these characters' mouths seems like it would come out of that character's mouth. It's true to their individual characters' personalities. And it's just to use your word, finesse of it that makes, and the charm of it that makes it humorous. So there's no real like laugh out loud moments in this movie, but you've got a smile on your face and you're kind of like internally chuckling the entire time. And the camera cuts, just that where they choose to cut, how they cut, that's charming. That's funny. It's so, yeah. If there's a way to make a movie where got this, like, just watch this movie. I know it's hard, I wish more filmmakers would watch this and not try to emulate it per se, but figure out why does this work?
It's very much a vibe movie, first of all. And it feels like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about with the style, with the tone, with the balancing and ensemble cast, it feels like it's sort of like a kind of a modern ode to classical Hollywood, even certain sequences. At the end, it's very romanticized. The end of it with Tess sort of walking over to Danny, realizing that he did all of this to try and win her back. It feels when Kat was mentioning about Ocean's 11 being sort of a something she would watch with her family. It reminded me of sort of the kind of 4-quadrant, again, kind of adult movie that Knives Out is trying to be. Like, I would say that's probably one of the most successful modern equivalents to something like this, where it is bringing back a genre that isn't normally given much attention these days. The heist movie here, the whodunit there. And it's modernizing that sensibility while still being true to the essence of what that genre is, and also with a little bit of a playful sort of self-awareness to it, not to the point where it undermines the story that's trying to be told, or like you were saying, Jason, where they're throwing in quips, every 2 seconds, sort of, I guess, diluting the substance of the film. But it's there, and I think also with this one, what gives it that edge is that the Soderbergh, the script is basically playing like 4-dimensional chess with its audience, where they give you bits and pieces of what they're planning, but they hold the whole thing back so that you get to be a part of the process, but you also get to be surprised when you see the process play out. That to the point that we don't even really understand Danny's motivation for this job until like 45 minutes in, or whenever Julia Roberts shows up. And then, then the stakes start to shift, and all of a sudden Julia Roberts is in your movie. And I think it gives it such a shot of adrenaline, like 45 minutes in.
I think you just nailed it. I think this has a couple of like the tropes of movies or movie, like the premise or setups that I really love. I love ragtag team movies when they're done well.
Yeah.
I love men on a mission movies when they're done well. And I love movies that are one step ahead of everything. And the great thing about this is this movie is one step ahead. The characters in this film that are always one step ahead of everything, but the movie's 20 steps ahead of its audience. Yeah. And so, it's that sleight of hand where we're showing even you are being conned, right? The audience, we are conning the casinos, but we're conning the audience as we're like you're. It makes you feel as if you've joyously been grifted. Where you're like, oh my gosh, we're
the 12th man.
Yeah, they just stole my wallet, right? Matt Damon just stole my wallet. And it's like I didn't even realize. And there's so many movies I did Focus last season that try to do that. I didn't dislike Focus, but it was never 20 steps ahead of its audience. It was 20 steps behind its audience. You got the Now You See Me movies where it's like they write themselves to try to be that, and they're like, holograms. We're all doing this by holograms. It's like, we got there. It's so easy to write up into the conclusion, but then the conclusion is you need a Deus Ex Machina to come in and like explain away all the things that you can't explain through good writing. This movie doesn't really have that. This movie is like, this is how we did it. This is what we did. This is what you saw. This is what you didn't see. This is the part of the conversation we showed you, but here's the part we didn't show you. And that is as satisfying as the journey itself. So, okay, we're going to do things a little bit different this episode because there's 3 of us, and I just want to put your taste to the test, Robert Yaniz Jr. and Kat. I want you guys to reveal your score, your rank. I will not reveal mine. I will reveal mine at the end. We'll figure out whose list I'm most closely aligned to, and that's the person I'll go with for the short list to cap off this season. Okay, let's start with you, RYJ. What do you got?
So
where's Ocean's 11 rank? What's the score, bud?
So like I said, these are all the beginnings of franchises, right?
Yep.
And the goal is to narrow down which of these movies has a shot at the vault. So for that reason, because I'm explaining, because I was really stuck between a couple here. So I have Ocean's 11 first. I have it first place on my list.
Wow.
At 9.25 because I edged it. I put my thumb on the scale because arguably there's another movie on this list that could have had that spot.
Yeah.
But I would argue this is the best of this franchise. And for everything we just said, it represents a remake that could really work. It represents these actors at the top of their game. It represents, the heist movie, all these things. Like in the vault currently, there's only one movie per franchise. If we're going to get an Ocean's movie in there, this is the one to get. And some of these other ones, I would argue there were better options for that franchise. So we'll get to that when we get to that. But yeah, this is first for me.
Talk about, again, two gamers. RYJ is thinking like three steps ahead. He's 4D chess. Wow. The mind of Mar-a-Lago here with us. It's amazing. Okay. Kat, what do you got?
This one ranks second for me.
Damn.
Yeah, and it was a hard one for this one because you have some of my like all-time faves in this, and that like
that's why you're both here.
I am, and in terms of my thing, so it's like killing babies here for me. So it's really hard, but I do think like to what you were saying, like I maybe could have edged it as like number one, but I mean, there's one that it's too precious to me. I think, and also in terms of film history as well. But I was surprised that I thought this one maybe would edge out another one would beat this one initially when I saw it. But then I saw it and I was like, it's too good. Like, the Soderbergh finesse is is no other, and we need more of these in our world right now. So I was like, even though I have a very strong tie to another one we're going to talk about, I was like, even my, in terms of like my film brain, this one has to be above that one.
You use the word precious, so I feel like that's a tell.
It's Shrek.
Later on, but we'll get there.
Shrek.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, so it's number 2. What's your score? What'd you give out of 10?
9.
9 out of 10. Holy shit. Okay. All right, well, it's time to move on. And there's another reason why both of you are here. In particular, RYJ. This is a triumphant return for him. In regards to Pixar, we're talking about 2001's currently rated 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, Monsters, Inc.
Would you listen to this? Blame it on the little guy with his one eye!
The creators of Toy Story take you into the high-pressure world of Monsters, Inc.
You little one-eyed cretin. Okay, first of all, it's Cretan. If you're gonna threaten me, do it properly.
Billy Crystal, John Goodman.
Where is he?
Monsters Incorporated, rated G, in theaters November 2nd.
Robert, after this, I think you and I have covered together every Pixar movie made in the 20th and early 21st century.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Monsters, Inc. was directed by Pete Docter with a screenplay by Andrew Stanton and Daniel Gerson. It's a story by Pete Docter and Jill Colton and Jeff Pidgeon and Ralph Eggleston. It's a triumphant return of Steve Buscemi, last seen in Reservoir Dogs just a few episodes ago in our Tarantino episode. It's a triumphant return of John Goodman, not seen since the days of the Flintstones. Claire, I apologize. This is going to be a double hit for you because I hate the fucking Flintstones. And I think Shrek is going to get its ass whooped again. I'm sorry. All right. Triumphant return of Billy Crystal, last seen in The Princess Bride. Triumphant return of John Ratzenberger, last seen with Robert on Toy Story 2, I think. Or was that you? No. We covered that in the top grossing movies. Yeah. Oh, man. It was released October 28th, 2001 at the El Capitan Theater, November 2nd, 2001 in the United States, and a budget of $115 million. It made $577.4 million. Steve Buscemi creeps into your bedroom at night. The Atonia keeps your limbs from fending him off as he creeps closer. You feel the suffocation set in.
I have Pixar delivers an imaginative, insightful family film about corporate corruption and the monsters within.
This I had never seen Monsters, Inc. before.
Whoa!
So my synopsis was the Monsters, Inc. kid I always hear about from my friends with kids, but I've never seen.
I saw this in 4K. The 4K of this is really lovely. You wouldn't think it'd make that much of a difference, but it really does, to the point that when you look at Mike's, he's basically a big eyeball, right? You can see the texture on the white of the eye. There is detail that I have never seen in this movie before. Now, in some instances, like Sully's fur, that isn't necessarily a good thing in certain shots, because you can see that, oh boy, we're pushing the limits of how hair can move. There's other shots, especially when it gets really fast paced, that where the HDR doesn't do this movie any favors. And yet there's a couple where it kind of does help because it kind of gets rid of a couple jitters. So I don't know. I think if there's a bit of, let me put it like this. I think if there's a case, sorry, Tom Cruise, for motion smoothing or true motion or whatever your TV calls it, I think sometimes stop motion, especially older stop motion, and some early CG animation, it actually does help smooth those movements out. I think for everything else that involves like real people, turn that shit off. Just turn it off. Let's start with you, Cass, since you've never seen it before. I'm going to see if you and I are aligned here.
Yeah, I was pressing play and my husband came in and he was like, "Oh, I love that movie." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's older than me, so I was like, "When did you watch this?" So I was curious because but that was actually like a seal of approval because he loves like animated films, graphic stuff. So I was like, "Oh, it must be good on that level at least," because he likes that sort of detail. And then I started watching it. I have to say, like, talk about chuckling. I was like laugh out loud chuckling throughout the whole film, like, and it was in a way because sometimes you go back and revisit these, and for me this was my first time, but some of the kid movies you realize like they were a lot of innuendos or they were like a little bit like cringe, and you're like, oh, I can't believe I was watching that, or like even as an adult, like, oh, that was like a little too much, or it's very dated in the jokes. This one, it was just funny. Like, it was just like, it holds up. Like, watching it for the first time in 2023, I was just genuinely laughing. And then I think it also helped me because now I have friends with kids and like a really close friends. They dressed up as this, like the little eyeball was like her pregnant belly, and then like the little kid, and so I actually kept imagining my friend as the characters because I was like like the little girl and stuff like that. And so I think it also kind of, I saw it from that lens as well of like, just like a little bit cute, because I think if I had seen it when I was a teenager, it might have been like, oh, like little kid, whatever. And so I enjoyed that. It was just like super cute, and the little Boo and then the monster. And then also because I had seen another movie in our list before this, which I think hurt it. I was like, the tech advancements of like the fur. I remember there being conversations around that, and just like seeing it. I didn't see it in 4K. I just saw it on my, I don't know if it's 4K, but I rented it or whatever on Disney Plus. And it was just beautiful. I was like, wow, this is still better than some of our CG from other films. I'm like, you guys should, whatever they did, get that. And so you can see how advanced they were, Pixar back then, and how far they've come. But it was like really at the top of their game because it was 2001, yet it still holds up, and that's kind of hard to do in terms of that. So you just see the crafts again, another craftsman in their game of, wow, that was really beautiful, and really cool. Like, I was mesmerized by Sully's fur, and luckily I didn't see it in that smoothing thing that you said, or whatever, the 4K version. But I think I still would have been like, I mean, you got to give it a little bit of leeway because it was 22 years ago. You do that with some movies today, you're like, oh, I'd rather take Sully's fur, even in 4K. For sure. So I don't know, I was pleasantly surprised because I really saw the list. I was like, oh, I don't want to watch, like I was just like, whatever. And then when I saw it, I was like, wow, this was so good. This was so good. I was like, who am I to have judged this? No wonder everyone kept saying how much they loved this movie. And it is for all ages. Cause even, for me, and then my husband came in, was like watching a little bit of it and like laughing, and we're, it was just like, it was so cool. And Rex was watching it sleeping. So I think he enjoyed it. So, but I was pleasantly surprised, and I'm glad I finally crossed it off my list. And Pixar, it was just top of their game back then.
They've, Robert, you and I talked about this in the Pixar episode. They've gotten they got real conceptual the further they went along, right? And some of that works, and some of it doesn't work. And there is a high concept here of like, there is a almost like 1950s or Metropolis style mechanicalization of terrifying children, and it's not just for the purpose of monsters are bad, but because screams and fear powers the monster city or whatever.
The world behind the monsters in your closet kind of thing.
And so, but that's it. That's where it ends. It's not like, and then we're going to go inside the head and confront your parental trauma from when your mom died in that car accident. Like, it's just a little girl who just doesn't who's like a toddler basically, and the monsters in her closet and a little bit of the corporate espionage, but it's not so high concept that it feels like it's got too many plot machinations behind it.
It's a kids movie about an energy crisis too, which I think is an interesting thing to point out.
And also, going about it the wrong way, like getting the screams
That's
instead of
true.
laughter.
Yeah.
Like maybe not oil, and we should do something else.
Joy is the ultimate renewable energy, folks.
Exactly.
Yeah. We need to power our society with laughter and joy.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the movie's about the power of laughter, which I think is a nice message for families and kids. But to your point about the animation, like it reached a certain point where Pixar, I think, was just trying to challenge themselves. Like, what's hard to do? Hair. Okay, we're gonna have a big furry guy as our protagonist. What else is hard to do? Water. And then the next movie is Finding Nemo.
Yep.
They were basically trying to push the boundaries on everything. So this is a movie I saw in theaters. I saw all of these in theaters when they came out. In 2001, I was working at an AMC, so I had free tickets all the time. But also, this is a movie that I've always liked, but I haven't really ever loved. Like I always considered it like because we did a whole episode on the 5 best Pixar non-Toy Story Pixar movies.
Yep.
This didn't come up, so I feel like people that have heard that episode, that's a little telling.
Yeah.
On my thoughts on this movie. Like I feel like it's upper second tier Pixar, if that makes sense. Because I do love the imagination that goes into this world. The whole third act sequence with the doors, going in and out of doors to different places, and like the sort of assembly line, the like you were saying, Jason, the machinery of all the doors carried throughout the factory. All of that stuff was really fun. The voice performances by John Goodman, especially, and Billy Crystal. We can get like a little bit of a Lebowski reunion with John Goodman and Steve Buscemi, which is fun. The Randy Newman score, like there's everything here is really solid. It just doesn't, for some reason, it just doesn't go to that next level where a movie like the ones we talked about on that episode, Incredibles, Inside Out, Coco, even Finding Nemo, and I forget the other one now. WALL-E. Those films, those are the ones we discussed there.
Yep.
It doesn't quite reach that level, but I mean, it is an impressive accomplishment. It did lose the Oscar to the other movie on this list for animated feature, which I think is interesting to where these films were when they came out and how they stand now, 22 years later. But
we'll get to it.
Yeah, I know we will. But ultimately, I agree with both of you. This definitely holds up way more than you would expect 22 years on from a visual and a narrative standpoint.
And you just reminded me of this film also for a Pixar movie. It didn't make me cry.
No.
Like that's like one of the first, like, and that's not a bad thing, but usually I'm always like crying in the Toy Story movies or all of these other ones and I get a little choked up. And this one was more like it was really just laughter and like you get a little bit emotional with the little girl and like, how Sully misses her and stuff, but it was never enough to like push me over the edge. So maybe in that sense too, like it doesn't hit as hard, but I think also there's something really magical and just also not having to go to that level of, especially if kids are watching this or whatever, you don't want to always have to go to that deep emotional level. Like it's nice to be like, monsters are scary, but this can be this. And it's like more of a lesson kind of thing, even for me who, I sometimes don't want to sleep with the light off, like, it's like, okay, it's just like, maybe there's a Monsters Inc. somewhere. So I think it's really nice. Like it was just kind of like it's just like kind of a solid movie. It's like not the best one, not the whatever, but it just feels like it's kind of hard to hold up 22 years later. And the fact that it does, I feel like that's also, I don't want to knock it, but it's just really like really solid.
I was just gonna say, I don't think it's a revolutionary film in terms of like storytelling or, oh my gosh, this is where, Pixar, they're pushing the envelope, I think tech wise. But it's not so much like, oh my gosh, this is where Pixar just went to that next level of storytelling and craftsmanship. It's just a very like sweet, charming movie. For me, there's really only one part of it that I've never liked. I guess I've only seen it maybe 2-3 times, but every time I'm like, I know why it's there. It just throws the pacing off and I don't find it funny. It's the Yeti. That whole Yeti thing with the snow cones.
Yeah.
I'm just like, fuck, get out of this. Let's
John
move on.
Ratzenberger has to work. That's what it is. I think.
I don't mind.
I really like the Yeti fur though is cute. Like you can see the texture.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's not.
They were showcasing the other tech they had.
The snow
That's
tech.
what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not him, right? It's not the performance. I'm glad he's in the movie. You know, that was kind of he showed up in all these movies for a while. And it's like, okay, all right, that's fine. I get it. But it just wasn't. I don't think that part was written well. I don't know how to explain it. I was just like, oh God, it just went on too long. But to the plus side, the thing that always sticks with me, and in particular this time on this revisit, is I love the fact that the final shot of the movie is Solly's expression, but we don't see the girl.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things, which is we don't know what the passage of time has been.
Yes.
So we don't know how old she is, right? Really. It's just like it captures that one moment is what I feel like some of the other Pixar movies, like the whole movie feels like that moment.
Yes.
And this movie only has one of those moments. Now it's extremely, I think, well done and very powerful, but it's like the last shot of the movie is probably the most Pixar feel, if that makes any sense. So, and because of that, I think the rest of it, it's good. It's charming. It's sweet. It's not a tearjerker. It's not, it's just kind of, it's a buddy movie, and these buddies are, it feels, I guess, more, this is going to sound so bizarre because it's what Pixar is, but it feels a little more cartoony. You know what I mean? It feels more like a cartoon movie, and and the thing is, I think what we're all saying is that's okay. It's okay to be that. Yeah. It's okay that it's not like, oh, this is in the pantheon of the greatest Pixar movies ever made, because even for the most part, even a mediocre Pixar movie, and I think this is above mediocre, but even a mediocre Pixar movie is typically better than a lot of other movies. So this is, I would put that in that like A- B+ tier, where it's like, it's not transcendent, it's not revolutionary, it's just really good.
Yeah.
It felt like a longer short in some way, like one of their shorts.
Yes.
Like, because the concept is very simple, yet that's not necessarily a bad thing. They just do it very well.
Yep.
Because there's some movies where they're trying to do, they can't do that simple well. It would be kind of boring or whatever. And this one, I was chuckling the whole time. So I feel like there was some. It wasn't like I was like, oh my God, this is like whatever. This is so silly, and this is so. I did think at one point I was like, oh, is this it? Like I think I was getting confused with the what's the one with the acorn, the little
Ice Age.
Ice Age.
Yeah, so I think I always confuse these with that, like, this Monsters Inc. with that one, like in my head, because I've never really seen that one fully as well. And so then I was like, wait, where are they? When are they going to the thing? And I was like, oh wait, this is not what that is. And then I kind of like settled into that, and I was like, you know what? But it's so nice. Like it was just.
Yeah.
It was like the last movie I watched in this group, and it was like a really just kind of like a nice
pleasant,
just like palate cleanser. Like nothing is too bad. Like I would probably put this on while I'm crafting again. Just like a nice little like nothing too harsh, but like it's I put movies on instead of like music when I'm doing stuff, so it would be nice to just have it in the background.
Well, to your point, like because it's so simple, you don't really have to pay attention to it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very amiable.
It's
and
a
pleasant.
They have to to get this girl back to where she belongs, and that's the story for
and then
the
like
entire runtime.
Then like certain set pieces, it gets loud or it gets fast, or it gets funnier, and that catches your attention, and you're like, oh, okay. And then for me, the Yeti part comes on, and I just go, okay, well, now's the time I'm going to take the garbage out and feed the dog. By the time I come back, they'll be back from Siberia or wherever, and then we'll be, we'll get on to the rest of the movie. So yeah, are you going to say something, Robert?
Yeah, I think well, a few things. One, I think that sequence at the end, those last 2 minutes, are what really give this movie a lot of its heart. Like you said, like the whole movie's about their friendship. So I think it's very important that Mike is the one that went through all the wood chips to try and put the door together and try to bring their friendship, because there's various points in the movie where they're not on the same page. And then I always imagined that, I was always hoping that they would do a sequel, like if they were going to do a sequel to something, to see what happened. I always imagined that would be like Boo's daughter, and it would be like she's grown up, and that would be like the take on this on a sequel. Instead, we got a prequel with Mike and Sully in college for some reason, which is fine. And as far as the Yeti thing, it feels like Pixar, who's usually like so pitch perfect with their world building, just falling a little too much in love with the idea that even Mike mentions at one point that, oh, you know, the Loch Ness Monster, you know what happened? They got exiled. And when we get a little taste of that later on, I feels like they took that joke, like they literalized it a bit too much. But the other thing that struck me watching it now, and it could be just watching it in this political climate, is like how much like the kids are demonized, and it really leads into like, you know, the kids are toxic, 2319 with the sock and all of that.
Oh yeah.
And it feels like this misinformation, like this misplaced fear, like the fear mongering and that kind of being harnessed for energy. It felt very sort of pointed, like social commentary now a little bit watching it these days.
Yeah. They're animating their society off of the power of otherizing.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It's like, well, these kids are monsters. Like the kids are monsters to the monsters. The monsters are monsters to the kids, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, as long as you can keep these, you know, as long as you can keep these stereotypes going, we can hoard this power for ourselves. And yeah. Rule the monster.
The people who created didn't have kids.
Yeah. All right. So what we're saying is the movie's pretty good, but it's not great. So we know it's not going to be Robert's number one. Robert, where does it land for you then?
I had this at fourth with the 7.8, which is to me is like, again, like you were saying, A- B+ kind of category for this one. Like I said, not the best of Pixar because it doesn't go that extra mile that some of the other ones we mentioned do, but I still think it holds up really well. And there's a reason that I feel like a lot of kids gravitate towards this one over the movies like Coco or Inside Out, where it's so emotional and then the parents are crying the whole time. It does feel it's lighter, it's more accessible in that way. It's less complicated, but I mean that doesn't make it any less valuable, is I guess my point. So
would this movie have been better if Sully had an abuelita who died from dementia?
I mean, probably. Honestly, I'd be down for that.
Yeah. That's what I mean, though. After a certain point, they're just like, yeah, your parents getting divorced. Yeah, your mom died in a car accident. They just go the Stan Lee route of it, where it's like, yeah, we'll kill a parent, Excelsior, you know. How do we get pathos into these characters? Murder their parents, give their grandma dementia, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Kat, where's this rank and what's the score for you?
Yes, this ranks fourth as well. And I gave it an 8.0.
Okay. All right.
I have a feeling Kat,
the thing that did surprise me that they were kind of showcasing child torture in this. I was like, that's crazy. I was even like, my husband came in, I was like, oh my God, are they gonna like torture the kids with screams? So that surprised me. And I actually kind of liked it more for that.
Yeah, if you're gonna have kids in a movie, torture them. It's a Binge Movies rule of thumb around here.
They're resilient. They can take it.
Yeah, that's all right. All right, let's move on to a movie I've already covered. Now it's time to see what Kat has to say, what Robert has to say. I'm going to prepare you both. Claire from W Rated, amongst many other things, might flame your inboxes and your tweets, or you might get a sternly worded subtweet, although she doesn't really subtweet. She just quote tweets. Let's move on to 2001 Shrek, which currently has an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes.
They may not trust mankind, but on March 15th,
Prepare for the Ice Age!
they have to save it.
Oh, that's perfect.
Ray Romano,
You're an embarrassment to nature. Do you know that?
John Leguizamo,
Captain Iceberg ahead!
Dennis Leary, and Scrag.
We are the weirdest herd I've ever seen.
Ice Age.
I'm pooped.
3, 2, 1.
Rated PG. March 15th only in theaters.
Shrek was directed by Andrew Adamson and Vicky Jensen. It was written by Ted Elliott, Terry Rossio, Joe Stillman, George S.H. Schulman. It's a triumphant return of all of these people because I've already covered the entire Shrek franchise. It was released April 22nd, 2001 at the Man Village Theater, May 18th, 2001 in the United States on a budget of $60 million, so considerably less than Monsters, Inc. It made $487.9 million. Fairy tale tropes get fractured when the monster becomes the hero and the villain is unrealistic body standards. Are they body shaming Farquaad? Are they penis shaming him? We've already covered that. We've already done all the dick jokes. Feel free to add your own. Kat, and Rob. Now's your time to talk about the sexuality and the horniness of the Shrek franchise. Does Shrek fuck? Robert, go.
I mean, not in this movie. That's just clear. That's probably why he's so angry. I had the Not Walt Disney Company presents an irreverent fairy tale that turned the world of animated film on its head.
Yeah. Yep. Cat,
for better or worse.
Yeah, for better or worse. Cat, does Shrek fuck?
I don't know about that. No comment. But this one, because this is the way I remember it, is those two really catchy Counting Crow songs.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I remember loving this movie so much, and I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I wish I hadn't seen it again. I would have just had it. I would have just had it in my in my nostalgic, like that was a great movie.
So we've talked about this on the show before with other guests. We talked about nostalgia busters. Was this a nostalgia buster for you?
It was just like a realization. I was like, it was one of the, it didn't like bust it completely because I still appreciate it because I remember the impact it had on me in terms of like just thinking like, wow, animation is like, it felt edgy. It felt like I was, like I was in on the joke, like it just felt like, oh, this is cool and stuff like that. And then like the song usage and stuff, I remember just being so obsessed with that. And I think also Princess Fiona just being a badass and not having to be rescued. And then her being also an ogre kind of like busted that myth. Although rewatching it kind of also is dated in those scenes, especially like the fat shaming and the talk around being ugly and things. Like Donkey is really kind of mean. like he doesn't mean to be, but there was some moments where I was like, oh, this is not a good thing, and this is sort of like, but that was our society back then. Like we were okay talking about being ugly and fat and things like that and making it a bad thing. So those kind of made me cringe a little bit because I was like, I definitely am more the Fiona ogre type, So I was being a little offended, I was like, what? But so all that, but then I do think it kind of ushered in a new era of like of what animation become, and we've seen that as what things have come out now in the years after. So I do think it's like it was a game changer, but I do think this one, unlike Monsters Inc., feels dated. So I try to appreciate it from when I saw it in that moment of like what we hadn't had, and then now I'm like, oh, we can appreciate it for what it brought in and like how it changed the landscape in terms of all these films. But I definitely think that there's some things that are a little bit problematic about it. But I will still have the nostalgic feeling towards it, but a little bit like, ooh, that kind of thing. So that's how I felt. And also not even just the story. I saw this one and I was like, oh, the animation, blah, blah. And then I saw Monsters Inc. and I was like, whoa, that was like, I remember thinking like the animation was pretty good, when I was 20 years ago. But then just seeing that comparison, and it's the same year, I was thinking like, you would think that Monsters Inc. was made now, and then like Shrek was made 20 years ago. It really does feel dated in that sense, so it doesn't hold up. So you can see like obviously this was like a newer like DreamWorks was barely starting their animation, right? So you can see like they weren't ahead like Pixar was. So I also will give them a little bit of leeway for that, but it's sort of in technical craft and also just like the story, it doesn't hold up as well as Monsters Inc.
So I think to your point, a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations, I guess by this point, maybe 4, have been raised pretty much on the mainstream movies that were animated, at least in the United States, that got theatrical releases, were Disney. Then in the 80s, a bunch of those animated artists left, and then Don Bluth got started, and they started their own group. And those movies were darker and weirder, but they were still kind of kid friendly and fairy tale. If they weren't complete fairy tales, they felt like fairy tales, right? So like Littlefoot's mom dies and it's pretty freaking brutal, but you could harken it back to like Bambi and go, okay, well, this is kind of like Bambi, maybe just like a little darker for the 80s or whatever. And so I think that in 2001, there was this I guess, our generation or approximate to our age, because we're all fairly close in age. Like, we were all hitting our teen years. We're sort of aged out of Disney movies. Disney, the Renaissance was also sort of over. I was starting to hit this lull. Sorry to fans of Emperor's New Groove, but it was hitting this lull and all this sort of stuff. And here came a movie that felt very attitudinal. It felt very almost teenage in its sensibility, where it's like, we're going to present this thing that you've seen your entire life, an animated movie, but we're going to have these sort of kind of, even though it's 2001, kind of late 90s like sensibilities, where we're gonna take it there. Shrek takes it there, you know, and there's obviously like dick jokes and dick size jokes in the movie, and there's this and that, and it's like a lot of the humor is more mean spirited, and it's very much more like what teens or preteens were like in the early 2000s. Your sensibilities, where you're just starting to realize that sex is a thing, and you're joking about it, but you don't really know what the fuck you're talking about. And and it's like you're starting to get the innuendo, right? It's not going over your head. You're like, oh, I get it. And I don't want to say that Shrek was risque, but it felt it felt like they were sort of breaking a bunch of taboos and saying things that couldn't be said before, and was like pushing the envelope. And now, as adults, so many years later, it's just sort of like, I get it. Ogres are horny. We're all horny. We're all living our life. We're sweaties. We're Shrek sweaties. We get it. There's a whole community, I learned, of Shrek sweaties out there, and sexy Shrek memes and whatnot. So, I think if you were slightly younger than maybe us, you took different lessons away from this. Like, Shrek is a sex symbol. So, Robert, have you ever been sexually attracted to Shrek?
Not even slightly. No, this is, like you guys were saying, this is the most conflicting of the movies this year. Like I said, I was working at an AMC at this time, and I remember the credits music from this, I still get PTSD to be like, oh no, I remember that, hearing that the bazillion times, because this movie was in theaters the entire summer. This is the summer that Disney put out Atlantis: The Lost Empire, to your point, Jason, about the changing of the guard, basically, with this movie. And I think, it comes from, I think Jeffrey Katzenberg was really, former exec at Disney, was really instrumental in this. So there's a lot of purposeful digs, not only at fairy tales in general, but specifically at Disney. The Duloc song is obviously a Small World kind of reference, things like that. But I agree with both of you. The story is a little more problematic than it used to be. The jokes are way dated. You have Mike Myers doing Austin Powers riffing halfway through this, when he does the they're talking about our Farquaad being short, and it feels just like in Austin Powers, it was that's not the way to get ahead in life. You'll never be the head of a major corporation. It's that kind of thing, that kind of level humor. And the references, there's the Matrix reference. There are guests at the party at the end doing the Macarena, which I noticed again this time. I'm like, wow, really?
Well, Macarena would have been dated even by 2001.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Holy shit,
exactly.
That's what, 95? Jesus.
And the animation, which at the time looked new and fresh, feels a little bit CD-ROM-y for the time now, looking at it. My wife even, was around when I was watching it, and she even noted that the mouths don't necessarily they sync up, but they do, but they're not as detailed. They're just flapping their mouths up and down. It's not their face isn't contorting the way your face actually moves when you speak. Which I think is a little bit of a testament to the limitations, perhaps budget wise at that point. And like we said, CG was kind of in its early days. So I don't know. I appreciate it as more of a cultural artifact than a movie that holds up 22 years later. And it's also to my earlier thing about viewing it as part of the franchise. I would say hands down Shrek 2 is better than this. I think Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which came out last year and now has made me actually think about the Shrek franchise for the first time in over a decade, is way better than this. So I
think the original Puss in Boots is better than this.
I haven't seen that in a while. I need to revisit that.
I really like the
probably.
Original. Yeah.
But it's mid tier, if not bottom tier of its own franchise. So that says a lot about, how it's aged, I think. 22
I
years
saw
on.
all of them in a row fairly recently, minus obviously Last Wish, which hadn't come out yet. But, Is this the one? Because I can't remember, even though I just watched it again. I can't remember. Is this the one where Pinocchio is revealed to be a transvestite?
No, that's one of the more problematic instances in 2.
I see.
In 2. There's stuff in 2 that I will not defend.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And also watching it this time around, Fiona is just, I remember thinking like, oh, it was really cool, like having her as like a badass princess, whatever. And then you just realize how generic she looks and like in the princess form. And it was almost off-putting a little bit. Like, I don't know. It was just like, I mean, I guess it was like their first one and it was a budget and they were kind of emulating all the Disney princesses kind of thing. But I was just like, I don't know. It looks kind of weird too. It's just, it just doesn't hold up. So it would be, if you want to show this to your kids, I would show it like probably earlier than the other ones. Cause I feel like it would just be hard for them to, I mean, not that they need to appreciate this, but I would just think like, oh, they're really going to be put off by it. Like, I don't know when you would show this to a kid, because I would like want to show it to them to like show them like, this is this cultural, like you said, artifact. Yeah. But I don't know how they would like process it given all the stuff that they watch is so much better now.
Yeah, I think really there's just going to be an entire community of Shrek body pillow waifu owning fans who are going to end up flaming you guys. They're just going to be like, I
didn't realize there was a whole thing around this.
My Shrek, Japanese Shrek waifu body pillow that I sleep with every night.
But I'm not dogging Shrek. Like, actually, I was like, I appreciate that there was like at least representation back then of like being a little bit more fluffy. So
being a little bit more fluffy, having very unclean ears, farting in public. Yeah, things we'd all do.
Yeah.
Using the candle wax to light your dinner table.
Yeah.
That was funny.
Candle,
yeah. Being very angry at your neighbors and screaming at them and being discriminatory towards other species. We could all relate.
Yeah.
All right. What's your score? What's your rate for Shrek?
Mine is a 5. Yeah, it's 5th, and I would say it's like 6.5.
Ooh, shit. Wow. Okay, Robert.
So I had it also at 5th. I was a little kinder than Kat was. I gave it a 7.3. Again, I really liked some of the stuff. Like, I love the subversion of fairy tales. I think that there's some clever moments. I like the arc that Shrek and Fiona's relationship has. Like, I like the way that develops, especially in the second one. But it's set up here with the happily ever after, and then the sequel, digs deeper. I think it has changed a lot of animated film after this point, like we talked about. For example, everything now ends with a sing-along. This was like every animated movie ends with them having a sing-along, and I feel like that's the trope that's really kind of started here, and it's done a lot of harm and a lot of good, but I think
now hang on, no
more
way,
harm than good. No,
hang
not
on,
a lot
Robert.
of good.
Franchise detours tells me, as well as Binge Movies, that movies that originally ended with sing-alongs were the Muppet movies.
That's true. I guess but they're not. Those aren't animated movies though. So
I
Muppets
see.
are in their own category.
They're in their own category of
because
film.
now the Despicable Me ends in a sing along, and like the Trolls movies ends in like it's like.
I mean, Troll movies are just one giant sing along.
That's pretty much
Kids Bop records, right? Is it
basically?
Yeah, Kids Bop the movie.
So so that's where I land. Like, it's obviously to me the worst of this bunch, but it's still got some merit. It's just you have to sift through all the stuff we were talking about.
Well, you heard it here. Robert and Kat both say Shrek is dog shit. It's time to move on. 2.
Don't come at me.
A movie that currently holds a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, the second highest grossing movie of 2001 worldwide, which just is a testament to the highest grossing movie when you think about it. Jesus, man. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
The shadow has risen again. The Dark Lord Sauron needs only this ring to cover all the lands of darkness. It must be destroyed.
The Lord of the Rings, directed by Peter Jackson, rated PG-13.
Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring was directed by Peter Jackson with a screenplay by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson. It's based on The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. The triumphant return of Sean Astin, last seen in Toy Soldiers. Triumphant return of Elijah Wood, last seen in Deep Impact. Triumphant return of Sir Ian McKellen, last seen in X-Men, Days of Future Past. One of the very few good X-Men movies, and the MCU will never top it. Triumphant return of Liv Tyler, last seen in the Days of Armageddon. Triumphant return of Kate Blanchett, last seen in Ragnarok, who is fantastic in Tar, if you haven't seen her in that. I think I'm in love with Kate Blanchett. I don't think I realized that. I think that I saw Thor Ragnarok, and the smoky eyes and the dark hair and the evilness of her, it awoke something in me, like Dean Pelton. That now I will dress up in a payday bar and dance outside of Kate Blanchett's house.
Prisons recruiting them, police be shooting them, rap artists looting them, labels all diluting them. Barack Obama, he's scared of me because I don't swallow knowledge and I spit it for free. Let me clear my throat. Ha ha ha. I don't know what that was. I don't know what that was.
I just think that she is stunning. I didn't think that in 2001. I thought she was creepy. But I think that, I don't know. I didn't think that in Ocean's 8 either, right? But there's just certain things where I'm like, I think Kate Blanchett is against all type other than being evil. I guess what I'm really saying is I'm only attracted to Kate Blanchett when she's actively evil. What does that say about my psychology? I don't know. But I think she's, yeah. And she's an extreme talent. Oh, my gosh. Speaking of sexy, this triumphant return of Ian Holm, last seen in The Fifth Element. Here is Bilbo Baggins. Sexy. Ooh, get that Bilbo body pillow. It's a triumphant return of Andy Serkis, not seen since the days of Black Panther. Film was released December 10th, 2001 at the Odeon in the UK. December 19th, 2001 in the United States. December 20th, 2001 in New Zealand. On a budget, I was kind of surprised it would do, well, Tolkien, but I thought maybe New Zealand first because the movie's impossible without New Zealand. But on a budget of $93 million, this film made $897.7 million worldwide, unadjusted for inflation. Ancient temptation threatens to raise evil of eons past, and only the smallest of Middle-earth's creatures can take the path of preventing it.
The director of Meet the Feebles pulls off one of the most impossible feats in cinematic history.
Kat, this is your chance.
I know. It's so yeah, this was Cat's coming of age. Aragorn and Legolas. I mean, come on.
Some people had George of the Jungle. You had Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, I think I need to find a Polaroid of it somewhere, but I had like all of Orlando Bloom like on my wall and everywhere.
Understandable.
We would still put up.
That's what you can't see it, but right over here, it's all Kate Blanchett now.
Yeah.
My coming of age was Thor Ragnarok when I was in my mid-30s. Okay, I saw this movie in the theaters in 2001, as did The Planet, and I didn't like it at all. I hated this movie. I mean, actively was like, the movie was boring. It sucked. I hated it. It was bad. Now,
I was like, I think I might need to leave.
Upon this revisit, I watched the extended cut, which is damn near 4 hours long. And I'm thinking to myself, to your point, Robert, the guy who did Meet the Feebles and all the other crazy shit he did, and then like right before this, The Frighteners.
Yeah.
Why the fuck did they give the guy who did The Frighteners basically something that had never been done before? Can you film the most unfilmable series of books of all time that are so epic in lore and grandeur and scale that the guy who wrote it wrote multiple distinct languages and separate dialects for those languages? It's not even just that there's Elvish, there's dialects of Elvish. This guy spent, I don't know how Tolkien even came up with this sort of stuff. The depth, the history, the maps, the geography. It just is never ending. And can you somehow condense that into like a 2+ hour movie? Take this entire first book and make it one legible film because you did The Frighteners with Michael J. Fox. We think you're the guy to do the job.
Well, even more crazy, they gave him all 300 million like pretty much up front, and they shot them back to back to back, like
that's
all
it,
at the same simultaneously. So this, as a result of that, each of these movies costs only like 100 million, which is crazy considering the scale of these movies.
And at the time where we've seen where CGI is at this time in 2001.
Yeah.
And to be like, okay, you have to do a lot of this in computer. We're gonna fly you to, well, he's from the area, but we're gonna you get to do it in New Zealand. That's fine. But here we're gonna give you all this money up front. You're gonna shoot back to back to back, which means, unlike the Harry Potter franchise, which we'll get to, you could have had 3 of the biggest disasters in Hollywood history, and they would have had no choice but to release them, right? If the first one comes out and we're all just like, this fucking sucks. Like everybody was like, this is garbage, and it flopped. Because here's the point I want to make about this movie. This movie, it's so easy to forget now that this is really the first film to bring this level of hardcore fantasy. This is unabashed nerd shit. People got beat up for playing Magic the Gathering 18 months before this movie came out. They weren't making comic book movies that were faithful to comic book lore. You were not going to get a Thor movie, or you weren't getting any of that shit. You were getting a Batman movie, and Batman wasn't even basically Batman because mainstream audiences thought Batman was too dorky. And then they just come out and unabashedly make one of the most hardcore fantasy nerd movies ever fucking made. Unashamedly. And it somehow crosses over that Rubicon for mainstream acceptance where everybody sees the movie. And without this movie, you don't get Game of Thrones. And I don't think you get the sensibilities of what Marvel is. I don't think you're getting Jack Kirby's New Gods. I don't think you can do Thanos. I don't think you can do Infinity Stones. I don't think everything of our culture for the last 22 years, for better or for worse, Robert, Kat, comes down to they got normies to buy into fucking elves and trolls and orcs and ogres and hobbits and halflings, and to know the difference. And that's the other thing. This fucking guy and the screenwriters, they had to somehow go, how do we condense all this to where someone who has never rolled a 6-sided die in their fucking life, has never even played Legend of Zelda, can discern it? Because this shit is dense. This movie should be indiscernible to a sane person in 2001. And instead it's like, and honestly, I find the movie is easier to watch now because we've had 22 years of fantasy because of this movie, that now if you watch the extended cut, it's basic.
It's so easy.
It's so easy. It's basically just like you're just watching like 3 Game of Thrones episodes in a row from any season. And it's just like, yeah. So that's my rant. Oh, also, let me finish by saying this. Ian McKellen delivers the greatest performance of his career in this movie. And in the whole series, but in this movie in particular. And it's one of the greatest performances of the last 40 years. I know that sounds ridiculous, but here's what I mean. McKellen, as Gandalf, when he arrives, he has to sell it all. If he does not get across to the audience that this little dinky ring is the most powerful force in this world, and it is tempting and seductive and dangerous and scary, if he does not get you to believe him, you don't believe the rest of this movie. Because he's this goofy, giant, fucking weird wizard with, blowing smoke of battleships and bullshit. But if you don't believe when he figures out what particular ring that is, and then he's like riding around Middle Earth, and he's coming back around, and is it safe? Is it hidden? All that sort of shit. And you see like him in almost a fugue state in front of the fire, where he's like, precious, where he's just like, there's some bizarre shit in this movie. But if he doesn't sell that to you, none of this is believable. All the Hobbit shit just then feels stupid and goofy and corny and cheesy. If you don't believe me, check out the sequel series of this series of films. we have to buy him so that we can buy all of it. And because McKellen as Gandalf believes it, we believe it. And because of him, I think he's the linchpin. And I can't think of a single part of this movie or single player in this movie that should be done differently or recast. I think everybody is fantastic. So that's my coming alive to how great Lord of the Rings is.
There's a very thin line between fantasy that soars and fantasy that falls flat. And to your point, like I think there's a very delicate balance. And when I saw this the first time in theaters, I also was pretty disappointed. Like I was into Gandalf's character because I already knew Ian McKellen from the X-Men films, like we were saying.
Yep.
So I was really on board with that character. And then spoilers for a 22-year-old movie, when he dies like 2/3 of the way through, I was kind of like, I lost interest in it. And I came out feeling very like, I don't know, that was fine. It was long and ponderous and a lot of walking. And then eventually, before Two Towers came out, my family and I gave it another chance. And we're like, man, this is amazing. What were we thinking? What's wrong with us? And then we've been on board since then. But I think the magic of this movie is that 5 minutes in, you get that prologue. Basically, I'm saying every movie should start with a Cate Blanchett monologue voiceover. That prologue, you're so amped up. So by the time before you even meet Gandalf and Frodo, you're like, oh yeah, they need to get that ring. I'm so on board. Like Sauron and Isildur and all that stuff. And you're bought into the lore. So that when they're talking about this one ring is all powerful, you're already on board. And I think it sets the table so quickly and so efficiently and so confidently that it's easy to get swept up in it.
If Cate Blanchett started a ASMR YouTube channel, I would subscribe to it. Holy shit.
She'd be a
Yeah, I know. Please just do it. Yeah.
Jason, have you ever seen the movie Bandits, which came out the same year with Cate Blanchett and Bruce Willis and Billy Bob Thornton?
Yes, I have, but I didn't realize that was her.
That was her. Go revisit that since you have this Cate Blanchett
fetish
fixation. Which is understandable. I get it, especially after seeing that recently. I covered that on one of my shows.
I want
recently,
Cate Blanchett to start an OnlyFans, but I don't want it to be her physically. I want it to be her voice, where she could just say semi-naughty things. Just some of the punchlines from Shrek. I just want some of the jokes from Shrek. I just like, oh yeah. Yes, I 100% agree with you of everything you just said, Robert. I think also at the time, though, in 2001, we were not as accustomed to, in film, serialized storytelling. Because this movie has no end. It literally is just like they part ways and then they're just walking off in the distance and the movie just goes, all right, that's it. And you're going, wait, what? What? In 2001, it felt like, it's ponderous. It's just a lot of slow-mo and a lot of walking and talking, and they're talking about flame of Urdu, and all this shit. I'm like, I don't even know what any of this. It sounds like they're speaking in tongues, at certain points of the film, and it's just like I don't know what any of this shit is. But now we've been so enculturated with nerd shit, and I say that with all due respect because this is a show called Binge Movies. It's about as fucking nerdy as it gets. But now we've been also enculturated in fantasy elements. To your point, you're like, oh, well, like it either flies high or falls flat. The entire decade of the 80s is littered with sword and sorcery fucking flops. They kept trying to make these fantasy movies off of the success of the original Conan the Barbarian. They're like, oh, people want wizards and they want swords. They want adventure. And they all fucking blow. You get Deathstalker 2. You get Beastmaster. And it's like that was what fantasy was. Like, oh, well, this guy's a barbarian with 2 ferrets. And he can talk to hawks, and you're like, oh, okay, this fucking blows. And then this movie comes along and he's like, hey, man, I made movies with lawnmowers and goo and brains and piss and shit. Now I'm going to make some fucking elf movies in New Zealand, which is a country that didn't even exist for most Americans until this movie existed. Sorry, Sam, not Sam Wise, Sam the man from movie reviews at 20 Qs. And it's just sort of like, this movie came out and how many Americans took their fat asses over to New Zealand?
To go to New Zealand.
Yeah, wanted to live there. How many fucking people went over there and was like, where's the Shire? How many people went to Australia by accident looking for the Shire? Millions.
Oh man,
this is what a cultural impact this movie has.
I mean, I was a little bit I have a different perspective. I don't know if you guys are a little older than me, but I was 13 when this came out, so I was obsessed with it. And before that, because I remember being in 7th grade and we were reading The Hobbit, so I was obsessed with that book. And then we had seen the cartoon of The Hobbit, and then so I think I knew this was coming out. So I was just like, I mean, I think people back then that know me, they probably remember me as like the Lord of the Rings girl, because I was just so fucking obsessed. Like, I think one of the guys I like in high school gave me like a Lord of the Rings book, like that was like how people knew how obsessed I was with this. Yeah. But when this movie came out, I think it just, for me, it blew my mind. Like, I think I always gravitated towards, like I've talked about this, like action movies and like that fantasy, but I think there was not really like a genre of this before, or maybe I hadn't seen any of those other like flops, or I don't know what. It was just kind of like, for me, it blew my mind, and I didn't understand in what ways, just because I saw it and was like, wow, what was that? And then there was more, and I always liked, because movies were an escape for me, like going off into this weird ass land and like not having to deal with whatever, like regular stuff or school stuff or whatever. And then it was just all these like different little threads, and then and the fantasy part, and then of course like Aragorn and the wizards. I don't know, I just loved all of it. And then and I did like, it was new where they would just like cut it off and they're like, oh, we're gonna have this in the next few years. So it was like something to look forward to as well. Like, I think that looking forward to is, now it's taken for granted a little bit, because we're like, oh, we'll get another one. And back then it wasn't like that. Like, it was new. It was something like we waited patiently for 2 years, and we didn't have an entitlement towards that either. It was like we were genuinely excited.
Or a fatigue.
There was no
like, oh,
yeah, there was no fatigue. It was just it was genuine excitement, and we weren't like bashing it or anything like that. Like, we didn't there was no social media, which I'm so thankful for back then. Like, I feel like it would have just been horrible.
There's no social media. And then I was just so thankful. What a dig from you.
Because it would have ruined, like, I almost like, this is actually, because it's so sacred to me, it's like the movie that that I think is foundational, and like I wanted to make movies, and coming from a small Texas town, I was like, how would I do that? But I was like, I'll do it because of this, and saw all the extra special features. I wanted to work for Weta, like all this kind of thing. Like, it really was the most pivotal moment where I almost don't talk about it on social media, because I want to keep it to myself, because then like even in this one, I'm like, oh, I have to talk about like something, and I end up always sounding like, I did the Mummy one, and it's the same thing, because the Mummy episode with Robert, and it was just like, it's so special where you're like, I almost don't have the words to articulate how, influential it was. But now that I revisit this movie at least like twice a year, and we watch the extended cuts and stuff like that, or even more, it's just a comfort movie. I do get to sort of like pick those little like like, it's still so detailed, it holds up very well. There are parts where you can kind of see where some of the tech and like the things, like you can see through the illusion a little bit. It's not perfect, but I do feel like you also have to think about like where it was in 2001, and the fact that like they were able to do that. And again, most movies try to do that now, and they still can't do that with all the technology, with all the resources at the helm. And so it still is, I don't know, it's just so amazing that Peter Jackson was able to pull this off and like get 3 movies off the back, and then all these like characters are so iconic. Like, I mean, I look back, the only one that does kind of like Sam and Frodo in terms of like Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, like their accents, I thought they were had those accents, and now I'm like, oh, but you kind of go with it because they're so perfect. Like, especially Elijah Wood, he would just, every time I watch it, when he turns around when Gandalf dies and like he has those tears in his eyes, I'm just like, oh my God.
It's almost perfect casting because Elijah Wood doesn't look like an actual human. So if you said Elijah Wood is a halfling of some different species, you'd be like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then like you were talking about with Ian McKellen, it kind of makes you wonder, like, this was the blueprint for all these fantasy sci-fi things where, I mean, we see it in 20 years later in all these movies that they always get like the trained like Oscar winner or theater actor or someone that needs to ground it because we believe them and we wouldn't just believe anybody. So I think they also made that blueprint. Like, I mean, Christopher Lee, Hugo Weaving was in the, like, anchored around like, maybe the newbies,
Yep.
like Orlando Bloom and some of these other ones, but I do feel like that was just like it was just great all around. And like, I mean, when Gandalf dies, if we don't care about Gandalf, we wouldn't have like, you
Exactly.
wouldn't
Yeah.
want to move forward. So I don't know, I think it just set the blueprint for all the films that I love now, and also TV like Game of Thrones, even like up into this point, Last of Us, or things like that where it's like complicated, or even the show Lost, that's one of my favorites.
What about
like it's just
Rings of Power or whatever it's called? Are you following that?
yeah, that one I have thoughts on. But I do feel that like it just lent way to also make sure, like, also, I mean, I was 13 and I maybe I didn't fully understand all of the storylines, and it took me a while. Like, I don't know. I think back then I think I did. But it made me feel as an audience member, even as a teenager, like they weren't treating me, like kind of like a kid, or like you could watch these things that were a little bit more complicated, a little bit more than just the regular action movie which were cool. That's cool, and like the dramas, but this was something I could really like sink my teeth into and like really analyze with my friends and things like that, or get really into it. And I feel like you could take off screen as well, and I love that. Like, I think it would just kind of made you linger in it a little bit longer. And with movies, if you really love movies, you want to like stay in that space as long as you can.
Yeah.
And I think Lord of the Rings did that for me, is like I could stay in this as long as I could. I could go to the books, I could go, watch all these things. I don't know, it was just, I could go on and on about it. But it's just still holds up. And yeah, and I think it people forget, because now the people who are like on the socials were born in 2001, so they don't really understand what came before. And not to like discredit that, but like you really have to like watch this movie, especially if you were born in 2001 or after, and really kind of put yourself in that, like, where were we, like we do here. You really have to kind of appreciate it, because if you just watch it and be like, oh, I've seen better, like you're not really like, it laid the foundation for so many things that they love now, like, we love now, that like you can't just dismiss it. Because I've heard people talk about it in that sense, and I'm like, but you don't know what it was, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you see, I think that they didn't have to sit through Kroll. They didn't have to sit through a movie where the guy had like I got to get the glaive, and I got to throw I guess up to this point, like what would have been considered fantasy that was remotely well liked was probably Willow, and that wasn't even that big of a success. Like that, even that was seen as like because it was supposed to be like the next Star Wars, and it certainly wasn't at the time. And it's like this did it. This broke it all open. Arguably, this and the next film that we're going to talk about, because they came out concurrently.
Yeah, I'm going to ramble again and for the next one.
Yeah, I just think, as somebody who has never read one of these books, likely will never read one of these books. So again, I can't tell you if I was a hardcore Tolkien fan who read the Lord of the Rings every year and ran through it all and had a room in my basement that had Middle Earth laid out, all this sort of stuff, that whether or not this is an accurate enough depiction, because I'm sure they excised major portions of the book and condensed shit and all that.
And this might be argued that this one is better than the book,
Well, yeah, right. I don't know. So like hardcore fan like you, maybe you'd be like, hey, this one's actually better than the book. Or other people are like, well, it's not true to the source material. I don't know the source material. What I'm saying is, as somebody who hated this movie in 2001, was bored by it, thought it was unsatisfying, felt unfinished, thought it was stupid and goofy. Other than Gandalf, I was always on board with Gandalf, probably because of the Magneto connection. His performance is just really good. Now, when I go back and revisit it, I was just sort of like, honestly, when the extended edition ended, I was like, I could have watched this for another hour.
Yeah,
I was.
Why do you think, like, I'm really curious why you guys didn't like it the first time around? Like, was it one of those things where you did kind of take it for granted, or you just didn't? I don't know, like how long after did you watch it again and then we're like, oh, I was just being whatever, or like,
I think it might have been just because it was so jarring. There was nothing like this at the time.
Yep.
And, I was...
So you kind of wanted to go against it just because?
I mean, I don't know if it was that
like...
necessarily, but it's like there wasn't this sort of high fantasy film. And so I think I wasn't really accustomed to this level of storytelling where you're just thrown right into it. Like Jason was saying, you know, hobbits and multiple races of elves, and now we're going to go to Rivendell, and then we're going to go, this is Isengard, and like all this. It's like, it was a bit of a high learning curve for me. And, you know, I was 18 when all these movies came out. So even then I hadn't, you know, I didn't have a background with Lord of the Rings. I didn't even really know much about it except, it was coming out. It's fantasy, I guess. Something about a ring. Like, I had no reference point. I'd seen the teaser trailer, I think, with the secret and safe kind of thing with Gandalf and stuff, but I didn't have anything to grasp onto. I was just kind of, you know, had to learn on the job with this movie. Which is why by the time the second one came in, I was like, oh my gosh, let's see what happens with Sam and Frodo now.
Two Towers,
Two Towers. I was all on board by that point.
I see. Here's the thing. My experience of it was I saw this one in theaters, didn't like it. And it was the density of it. It was the fact that the movie really does not, other than that opening narration, doesn't really. There's all of this. They
don't dumb it down.
It doesn't.
For you.
It doesn't. There's no real like easy on ramp. And you're sort of like, wait, what? And so the first time you watch it again, because there's nothing really like this. We're not. The mainstream audience was not as familiar with fantasy tropes, and a lot of fantasy tropes came after the Lord of the Rings. Right, a lot of people took Tolkien's work and made their own iterations on it. And so we got translations of, I'm just telling, like, go back and watch Krull or Willow or Beastmaster or Deathstalker or even Conan the Barbarian or any of those movies. Like, that was fantasy. And it was sort of like, I don't know, it wasn't this rich, it wasn't this detailed. And it felt, when you were watching it, for me, I felt almost on the outside of the movie. I felt almost alienated by it, because I'm like, I don't know who these people are, and you're acting
What's going on?
I do. It felt like just jumping into the second movie almost, in a way, where it's like, I don't know this world. I don't know these people. I don't know what fucking language you're talking. It was very alienating at that time, because movies didn't function like this. Now all franchise movies function where it's like, oh, well, you know, see, the Rainbow Bridge was destroyed because Heimdall was killed on the ship and by Thanos with the Infinity Stones.
And you're like, oh, stop talking about it.
Right. So we have all that crap in our head now, just as part of mainstream culture. So Thor can't get back to Asgard. So when the 9 realms are in danger and the frost giants show up, I honestly think if like any of the Thor movies had tried to be made in 2001, it would have flopped.
Oh yeah,
even Ragnarok, because you're just like, what the fuck is this? What's Ragnarok? What's all this sort of shit? Like, it just never would have worked, because we weren't conditioned for this type of storytelling as mainstream audiences at the time. When Two Towers came out, I didn't even see it in theaters, because I was like, I don't think I like Lord of the Rings. I saw it on video, and I really liked Two Towers a lot more than Fellowship. So that'll be interesting when I revisit that one. And then that brought me back, and I was back in the theaters for Return of the King. And I really liked Return of the King. I thought it had some really cool stuff in it, and like, of course, 15 fucking endings. But I was like, okay, all right. I had a little fatigue there. So that's going to be interesting, because I'm definitely going to revisit those as we continue on in the decade. But I honestly, Kat, to your question of like, when did it start working for me? Probably this viewing, because I've never really gone back. I've seen, again, bits and pieces of it, because it's been on TNT every weekend for the last 55 years. So, you know, but to sit down and watch it, this is my first time watching the extended cut all the way through. To contrast me, my dad, who was a big Tolkien fan and read all the books and had all the books and all this sort of stuff, loved all these movies, and I ended up buying him the extended trilogy from Best Buy, when you remember that was a thing. Back in probably 03, 04, whenever they finally were all out in a box set. You know, I don't know if you remember how fucking expensive that extended
I got that
DVD box set was. It was like $150. I was like,
I think I got it.
I was like, that's your Christmas gift. And he would just throw this shit on. This and Band of Brothers. He would just like, here's 20 hours of content, and he would just roll through it. So I don't know. I think I'm just now. Maybe you can thank Kevin Feige for getting my brain on board for this kind of shit. So,
I mean, now I think about it. If you think about it, it was so bold. Like it's like, and I still have people like, you know, that haven't watched it, that are my age too, and they're just like, oh no, I'm not like you kind of know what kind of people, like what kind of what viewers people are when you meet them, and like they'll be like, oh no, Lord of the Rings, whatever, I can't sit through that, it's so confusing or whatever. You're like, oh well, you're not gonna like this and this and this,
right?
and then so it kind of was also like for me, I think I didn't judge people, but like I could see like in going forward in college and stuff, if people didn't like Lord of the Rings, I kind of knew like they were more like on the surface level, like that kind of thing in terms of
They're
their
just superficial people.
But in terms of
if
their
you
like
don't like Lord of the Rings,
in terms of their like viewing
person.
like I wasn't in terms of their like viewings like movie stuff, I wasn't gonna watch certain things with them because I knew they wouldn't like it. But it's not for everyone. Like I don't know, for whatever reason it just hit me. But I could go the opposite way. Like, I'm sure it's not for everyone. But it's crazy that it was for like a lot of people.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like it's kind of amazing. And I think like, and if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have a lot of the things we have now, which it's just it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, for better or for worse, right? So do we learn the good lessons off of this movie, or do we learn some bad lessons? I don't know.
Yeah, I think TV learned more of the good lessons than the movies did.
I think that's actually true as well. Yeah, I think too, like, okay, at this point in 2001, if you'd asked me, what is your favorite movie? I probably would have, like Robert, I'm guessing would have said The Matrix. And the thing about
I mean, The Matrix also laid the foundation for
that's
this
actually
kind of
true
thing,
too. Yeah, Matrix was also stepping it like, hey, we're gonna do some real nerd shit.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that The Matrix had that this movie didn't really have was, it's nerd shit. We're gonna put this really slick layer of super dope for the time special effects and action. It's gonna be like almost feel like wall to wall action.
Right.
So we're gonna trick you into we're gonna sugarcoat this so you don't realize how fucking nerdy this is. And then in the sequels, they were just like, now that Lord of the Rings is out, we can make this as nerdy and weird as we want. And Robert loves that shit, and I think they're abominations. But
the Matrix also had an ending too.
That's my point. That was my point.
I think is the thing.
Matrix is a simple 3-act structure.
Right.
Because they didn't know they were going to do the other ones.
Yeah. Clay had a classic 3-act structure. So by the time he flies off towards the camera, you're like, well, he's going to save the world. That's it. That's great. It's wonderful. Fuck yeah. And you leave. And this movie is just sort of like, I would have followed you to the ends of the earth, I would have gone all the way. And he goes, I know. And it's all like dreamy and Enya music playing. And it's like everyone's speaking in almost like in slow motion. And then they just sort of go walking down the river or whatever. And they're just sort of like, that's it? That's it? Right. It takes 2 hours before the fellowship is even put together. And then it's over. They
don't last very long. It's like 45 minutes of the fellowship. It's all pretty much done. Yeah.
I always have a soft spot for the first ones in the franchises because I mean, if it's good, like you always like. I would argue, I think I like Two Towers a little bit more, but I hate the beginning part of Two Towers, so I feel like that's what always knocks it for me. So then the first one, I always feel like it's like the nostalgic, like this is what started it. So you kind of always need obviously the first one to go on, but but it always makes me a little sad too because I'm like, oh, the fellowship's getting together. Sort of like when we go into our next film, it's sort of that like you feel like it's like a fun little ride, but then it gets really dark really quick.
Well, and also I didn't have the context of, hey, there's allegorical elements here to this story when Tolkien wrote it, and so there's common.
But you shouldn't have to. Most people wouldn't have. That.
But there's commentary on, say, like the Industrial Revolution, right? So like these orcs are being created, but it's the consequence of like deforestation, right? It's like when you look at Sauron's realm, Mordor, and everything around it, where they're like creating all these fucking monsters. It's like how it looks like the industrial England, right? It's like fucking smokestacks and the sky's blotted out, and it's like, well, because that shit was happening. There was literally all of London was under a fucking smog because there was just factories everywhere, and like then you have, of course, like the Second World War and like the lust of for power, and how even good people, good nations with good intentions, if you give them power, they use that power always like corrupts them and leads to destruction. And it's like, okay, that all seems very basic, but again, I think I needed to maybe grow up a little bit to really appreciate those and just how well. Like, I'll give just a real simple example. It's in that opening, and it's like, okay, the ring falls off of his hand because he cuts his fingers off, and then when Isildur puts it in his hand, the ring shrinks to his size, and it's like power that corruptive power will always meet you where you're at, and it'll always seem like, oh, this is the perfect fit. If I just had more power, I could make the world a more just place. Everybody believes that. Everybody. Look at Twitter. Everybody believes that. We all believe that if I was in charge, I would fix this. The world would be safe. I would destroy the evil. And everybody who takes that power on ends up becoming evil. You know, and again, it's like, oh, well, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah, you could be reductionistic to that, but it's like when you see each of these characters, including Gladriel or whatever the fuck her name is, and even Gandalf, who's like deeply tempted, like deeply like darkness emerges in each of these characters. Everybody, I guess, except for Aragorn. You know, he's our true blue hero who's just is like, no, I'm gonna close that hand. I don't even want it. And but even that's
I just want to go live with my elven
right.
elven
Yeah,
friend.
I don't blame him. But even that's like part of it, right? Even that part of it is like what makes him a virtuous character, even though he seems like a scoundrel, is because he doesn't want power. He deeply understands that power does not solve problems. And that so he just doesn't want it. And so he's the only one that's able to, and as the series continues, of course, we'll see even Frodo, Sam, everybody's tempted by this thing, that he's the only one that like closes the hand and goes, nah, I don't want it, right? Because he recognizes power for what it is, which is a horrible burden.
Well, it's what he's been running away from his entire life. So it fits the character's arc. Yeah.
Yeah. So in like those things like stick out more, and then you realize like, does it really matter? Like I can't pronounce that character's name. Not really. What matters is what the story that's being told here. In some ways, the morality tale that's being told here.
Yeah.
And just how
the stakes. It's simple.
And how
but it's just covered in all this fantasy part, but it's stuff that we can
grand.
understand. Cause like I still get things confused, like Sauron, like, you know, like when I'm watching, like, wait, what was that? You know, like even watching it like 50 times or whatever. And then, it's trying to explain it to people, or it's like Game of Thrones. Remember like when you try to explain it to people, but like I watched that first season where I think I was kind of like, I didn't really understand all the characters, all the little, like the kingdoms, but then it becomes simpler because you're like, wait, someone just wants this and this and that, whatever.
Yeah,
and then as you go on, you keep rewatching it, like those little details, while they do matter, they don't really matter because it's more about the other stuff. And that's what like Lord of the Rings sticks, like it's like that feeling of, you know, adventure, and then like what would I do if I had the ring, you know, like that kind of thing. And it doesn't matter what land they're in now, you know, it's just, you know, that things, you know, that hey, you shouldn't be killing the trees, you know, like things like that, like or if you do think you should be killing the trees, well, you know, maybe you're seeing it from a different perspective. But like so there's like a little bit of like, I think although it seems like it might not be relatable, which I don't think things have to be relatable, there are things you could cling on to from like certain tropes that I think maybe there hadn't been something like this before, but we had glimpses of it in like it just was all put together, like the action, the romance, the sci-fi, the epic adventure, and it was just like melded into something where like, whoa, I didn't know they could be all in one.
Well, this movie does what all great mythology does, and I'm assuming that comes from the source material, but it is a perennial, it is speaking of universal themes and perennial lessons that we as human beings have to continuously be told, because we are continuously forgetting history. We're continuously forgetting the past. So we are continuously doomed to repeat it, which is that again, going back to that theme of so much of what makes up our world on a political level, national level, economic level, personal level, is the desperate attempts to grab for power. If I had the reins of control, and we can spin it, and some people are just flat out evil. You know, Sauron is just flat out evil. But there's all kind of gradations in between. There's a lot of people who aren't actually evil, but if they were to get that power, would be completely corrupted. Gandalf, you know, when he's got the line before they go into the again, here we go, the dwarf mine, right? The great dwarf city, right? What's it called? Moria?
The Mines of Moria.
Mines of Moria, right? Before they go to the Mines of Moria, he's like, you know, I've lived a very long life, and I've been, you know, I've faced many things, but even I have not been tempted in every way. And so what he's basically saying is like, keep that ring the fuck away from me, because I'm not sure, right? that even I can be
Yeah.
trusted. Like this guy's 1,000 years old or however old he is, right? And he's been through, he's faced all of these moral challenges. He is a good guy. He is a good character, but he is there. We see that conflict in him and that temptation and that lust begin to emerge. And it's like, oh my gosh, what could I do with this power? And then you would just have someone like Saruman, who's like, Saruman the wise, Saruman like the king of all the sorcerers, basically, right? Like the oldest, the wisest, the whatever, the Yoda of all this shit. And he has been corrupted by looking into this ball, and he sees the eye of Sauron, and then he's just sort of like, I'm just going to be complicit. I'm not even going to get the power, but otherwise I'm going to be, I'm out of pure self-preservation. I'm just going to align myself with the evil. Right?
Better to be on the wrong side than the losing side.
That's it.
He did not seriously think that a hobbit could contend with the will of Sauron. There are none who can. Against the power of Mordor, there can be no victory. We must join with him, Gandalf. We must join with Sauron. It would be wise, my friend.
Tell me, friend, when did Saruman the Wise abandon reason for madness?
And that's a lot of, I mean, that's in or if you're trying to do the allegory thing, like a lot of people had to do that.
Yes.
Either to save themselves or save their families, or just because like they don't want to deal with like, I don't want to deal with that bullshit, which bullshit is like wars and things.
Right.
But like, it's like, you also can't blame him in a way, because you're like, well, I mean, it was all going to go to hell. Like, what is he going to do? But I mean, then he ends up doing really horrible stuff.
But there's also like,
but
okay,
the choice of being complicit.
Yeah, Gandalf is like, I know this sounds like we're going real deep into this, but it's like, if you're like, oh, this is nerd shit, but just listener, think about the themes that we're saying here, not necessarily like the terminology, but he's like, we don't have all of these seen balls, right? Like it's like the fortune telling balls, basically. He's like, the crystal balls, like we don't know where all the seeing stones are. So because of that, it's corrupt, it's dangerous, and whatever you look at can see you and all this sort of stuff. And Saruman has been so powerful and so wise for so long that he thinks he's infallible. He thinks he's incorruptible. And so he's been messing around with this thing that he doesn't quite understand, because he doesn't think that he thinks he's powerful enough to overcome it. And somehow in that process, that's like his vision of the world ends up being corrupted. He's like, the whole world's going to burn. Everything's going to end. That was not a foregone conclusion. That's what was in the balance with through the story. But his vision gets corrupted. And because he's like, well, if the world's going to end and Sauron's going to win anyways, might as well join that side, right? Better be on the winning side, like you said, the losing side. And I get to retain my power and all this sort of shit, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to risk losing everything I've gained. So I want to hold on to what I have. And like, we know that people did that with the Nazis. We know that nations were like, well, we're going to join we're going to join with Germany because we're next door and we don't want to be better to be occupied than destroyed, right? And we'll just go along with it. Hey, yeah, we'll give you weapons, we'll give you soul, we'll go along with it. And so like, it's like, he makes a deal with the devil basically because he's out of his own arrogance. And it's like, here's the other thing. This is going to be real controversial. I think this movie ruined Star Wars. And here's why. Because the original Star Wars trilogy, that space opera serial adventure movie with sci fantasy elements, the Force and this and that, that was about as deep as mainstream audiences ever went into fantasy. The fact that nobody wants to talk about Star Wars is there's nothing beyond that. Though every time you try to go deeper into the lore, you fuck it up. You fuck it up. Oh, well, it's because of midichlorians, or it's because of this, or all the extended universe shit. Well, actually, there was this, or this, or this, and this. And you're just like, okay, every time we try to enrich it into a deeper form of fantasy, you actually end up throwing the formula off, because then it's not a space opera anymore. Now it's a space opera. It's trying to pretend to be a fantasy, and it just doesn't mesh. All of that forced stuff and this, that, whatever, it was all window dressing for a space opera Buck Rogers adventure serial. It was like adding a little bit of like fantasy to give it a little bit more of a depth and whatever. But it every time you try to make it more Lord of the Rings, it throws the balance off, and you're just sort of like, what? This doesn't feel like Star Wars. That's what everybody always says. Yeah, it's kind of, that's cool, but this doesn't feel like Star Wars, because Star Wars is a movie about monsters and swashbuckling, and all the Force stuff is in the background. With the Lord of the Rings, their version of the Force and all the rings of this and that, that's all foreground. That is the point. That is what it's about. That is the world. It's not just like, oh, well, some people like it. And I think from this point forward, they've been trying to make Star Wars Lord of the Rings. And every time you do that, you fuck up what made Star Wars enjoyable in the first place, which was, it was just a really fun time at the theater with some nerdy magic thrown in. It wasn't a magic movie. It wasn't a force dyads and force timing and this crystal from this Darth Vader has a castle on a lava planet. It's like, no, this isn't Lord of the Rings. This is Star Wars. So I think that this now switched audiences' appetites from, we want this stuff. We want the depth, the lore. And Star Wars has desperately been trying to catch up ever since. And to, in my opinion, not great effect. It's killed what made Star Wars unique. Star Wars is Star Wars. Lord of the Rings is Lord of the Rings. And Star Trek is Star Trek. Don't try to mix this shit. That's my opinion. Robert, tell me I'm wrong.
I mean, as someone who was really into the Star Wars movies and has kind of lost interest in the franchise with all these Disney Plus shows, I don't know if I'm necessarily qualified to chime in on that. I will say that the Star Wars universe has gotten smaller and smaller, where now the things that interest me the most were the Skywalker things, and now everything beyond that, I'm like, it's fine, I don't care.
Well, they're all related anyways. They all knew each other.
That was the Star Wars story, was this Darth Vader, his son, his kids, etc. And beyond that, it starts to interest me less and less the further you get away from that core story. So I think I think that sounds like I'm basically agreeing with you and just saying it a different way.
Yeah.
That there isn't really as large of a palette for the Star Wars universe as there is for the Lord of the Rings here.
But look, Kat, look at the difference in the source material that Tolkien himself, the guy had to write encyclopedias as supplemental material to his books, which were also the size of encyclopedias. So there's just more. Source material is deeper. That's my point. The source material of Star Wars is World War II dogfighter movies, Akira Kurosawa samurai films, and fucking Buck Rogers. It's not Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I mean, and it's okay. Like, it's okay that's what that is. But yeah, and I guess you're right, because I also have been turned off by like the new shows, but I think it's because to me it does also feel like fluff, and I have the opposite feeling. I wish they would go more into other like the newer Star Wars movies. I wish they would have just gone away from the Skywalker thing, because I think maybe to your point, there isn't enough there, and they're like really like stretching. Like it's like the line from Lord of the Rings. Like I feel like what is it, like the butter spread over too much bread or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's how it feels. Like it feels very thin in their thing. I'm like, let's just like, because my husband's talked to me about like all the other Star Wars stuff and like how there's really like cool Clone War and blah blah, and I'm like, oh, that would be a cool movie. Like, why don't they explore that and like get away from the Star Wars? Because then my thing, it really ruins it for me when like there's all these prequels and stuff, and like you already know the ending sort of. Not that like I don't like things that I know the ending to, but it can be like when we've had like 6 of those, it's like, well, I already know the Death Star and Darth Vader and blah blah blah, and like what's
you've
the
already
point?
gotten
like,
the payoff.
Like, it really isn't.
Yeah. Why are you giving me the build up?
So I'm just like,
fact? Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and so I would like wish we would just get away from that, and they would be, and they have this foundation of all the Skywalker lore that like if they were to move on or go to like a different thing, that would be cool to like, you can go back to that and like have your own, like, this is what happened then and now there's this new thing and blah blah.
Well, just say I don't mind the idea of, like you were saying, of exploring other things in the galaxy of Star Wars. I guess my point is every time they've tried to go back and go, like this movie,
there's more to it. There's
not
not more to it. And then they're making stuff up in between it, and then it doesn't make sense because it goes against the actual
the Force
thing.
works like this now, and it's like no. Whereas like this ring, this object in this movie has 50,000 pages of text written about it. And it's passed through the lineage and it was forged at this time. And so there's all that like explaining the ring and where it comes from. Like you guys were saying, just the fucking opening, the prologue of this movie is like a little movie itself that's entertaining because the backstory is the point. The backstory in Star Wars of where does the Force come from and what is it and who's Yoda and how old is he and what was his dad's name? That was never the point. The point was always, in those original movies, the relationships between the characters. Mm-hmm. That's in the Lord of the Rings.
But
the mythology is also the point here in Lord of the Rings. And I think what I've gained in the 22 years since is I've transitioned from being a guy that liked the Star Wars style of, like just give me enough background so I give a shit about these characters. Let's blow shit up. To now, no, I'm now more. I want to know like who forged that ring? What happened to the 9 kings of men? You know, like I want to know about that. I don't need a TV show out of it, but I love that the movie explores that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you see that with the movies that try to emulate Lord of the Rings or even TV shows, that if they don't have that like foundation, it just feels like fluff and it just feels like, oh, well, you like Lord of the Rings, you're going to like this. And it's like, wait, no, I need a little bit more. Like you don't have to go super in depth and like be like, this is based on the Nazis of World War II. Like, I don't need all that. But if you're just kind of going off the success of Lord of the Rings or things like that, you see that in some movies and TV shows, like they just think like, oh, we have enough of like this thread and they don't go deep into like the mythology. It falls apart, and that's why they're not successful. So, I mean, there is a point
even
to that.
let's think about the last few seasons of Game of Thrones. When they ran out of source material, the books, which are also like, you know, George R.R. Martin was like, you know, trying to be the modern Tolkien in a way. When they ran out of books that were this thick, and they're gonna have to like, okay, well, how do we continue this story? Then all of a sudden it's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. That character, well, we got there and it kind of makes sense we got there, but not that way. And like all of a sudden it's like became ramshackle, it starts falling apart. And then you're just sort of like, oh, what's happening? And you're like, wait, what? We spent all this time building up this character for this thing, and now they're not even going to be involved in that. Like, again.
Yeah. And time and space don't work the same way.
Yeah, we're just teleporting across the kingdom and like, yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, I guess what we're coming to is this movie's an awesome translation of incredibly deep mythology. And somehow Peter Jackson and his screenwriters and the cast and crew of this movie were able to utilize every tool at their disposal in 2000 or 1990, whatever, when they started making these movies, for the 2001 release to translate what could have been untranslatable to the world. And 22 years later, even non-believers like me have now been converted because I think this movie is great. So, Robert, we know it's not your number one. Where would you put it?
This is number 2 with a 9.2. And I, obviously, like everything we've said, I agree with. One of the best movie trilogies of all time. Such a triumph on every level. And yet, I would argue either of the next 2 would be a better inclusion for the vault, in my opinion.
Which is wild, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is wild.
That's it. That's good though. That's good.
Yeah. So my thing is I'm trusting whoever future guests are on those episodes for Two Towers and or Return of the King to stump for those, because it would feel weird to me for this to be the only Lord of the Rings movie in the vault, and the chances of getting more than one in the vault are very slim. So
unless you bring us back for Two Towers.
That's true. Good point, Kat. Because I like we were saying, Jason, like
I will go off without it.
Like we were saying, Jason, like I don't. This doesn't have an ending as a standalone work.
Yeah,
it doesn't quite measure up to something like what I feel like Two Towers works better as a standalone experience.
That's
and
a good
obviously
point.
Return of the King brings the whole thing, full circle. You get the prologue with Gollum's kind of origin story in Return of the King, and then it all ends like on multiple times, but it ends eventually. So
plus you have an army of fucking ghosts.
Yes, you do.
Argon,
yeah.
like fucking TJ Hookers over that ship, and they fucking the ghost armies behind them. And I was like, I sat in a theater. I know we're not there yet, but I was just like, what the fuck is this movie? Yes.
It turns into a horror, like another genre.
Yes,
you know,
I don't know
like
what this is, but I love
that
it.
still scares
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
You don't really have enough Gollum in this movie, too, for my taste. I love that character. I think Andy Serkis is amazing as him. You get a walking tree in the second one. Basically, all I'm saying is it's good, but before we get ready to put one of these movies in the vault, I would wait a little bit. Till the
Well, that
next-
walking
next
tree,
couple.
it was one of my favorite characters of all of the Lord of the Rings 20 years ago. So we'll see when we get to him again. Whether I like him or the whale and Way of Water better. We'll see. The one thing, my one knock against this movie before we get to you, Kat, is I fucking hate Pippin.
Yeah.
I hate Pippin. I hate him. I hate him. Every time Gandalf verbally abuses him, is like, you fucking fool of a toot, you goddamn stupid son of a bitch. I'm just like, yeah, fuck Pippin. Fuck that guy. I hate him. I actually hate Merry and Pippin. I hate how fucking stupid their faces are. They're like just always smiling and slack jaw. And every time, like, they're supposed to be kind of comic relief and whatever. I don't ever find them funny. They could have excised. I know it would be blasphemy, but just take them the fuck out of the movie. I hate them.
The movie leans on them a little too hard for every time things are going well, one of them does something stupid, like you were saying, Jason. Like, I feel like from a screenwriting perspective, like that starts to get kind of repetitive. Like, Frodo's going to almost die. We're going to have to save him. And then Pippin's going to do something dumb and escalate the situation. I feel like that happens like 2 or 3 times in this movie.
But in a 4-hour movie, if my only complaint is there's 2 minor characters that I fucking hate, that's
well, and their arcs build in satisfying ways in the sequels. So
yeah, what would have been more satisfying is had they both died. But Kat, come on.
Yes, this is my number one.
What's your score?
Feel like it would just be blasphemy to not have it. Like,
what if it was your number
like
3 or whatever?
Yeah, that's my number 3. I like Shrek, and
I feel like I would have to question my whole trajectory of my life, my film, my film life, my film criticism.
I'd love to have both of you back, but Kat will probably be on the set of the next Peter Jackson movie by the time we do that again.
No, I wish. But I would just be there like, oh my God. So this is, I had it 9.8 because I mean, it's not perfect, but it's nearly perfect.
What's not perfect about it? Merry and Pippin?
I mean, that, and like there is some moments where it's just like, I mean, the Frodo and Sam accents, I mean, they're not the best.
There's only one.
But they're also so lovable though, and then there is like some CG that's a little like,
that's what I was going to say.
That's just
there's
dated.
one moment, like some of it's dated, and it's almost like kind of cool now because you're like, oh, look at that, that's kind of neat. It's kind of feels old timey now. But there's one scene, I think it's Isildur when he like stands up and he like puts the ring on or whatever, and their battle's happening behind him. It's like he's clearly just in front of a screen, and the proportion, the aspect ratio is all off, and you're like, wait a minute, how are they so close to him but so small? It's just like a quick cut. I was like, oh, that was the most jarring thing. Who has the better troll, this or Harry Potter? The cave troll in this or the troll at Hogwarts? CGI wise.
I would say this on both counts. CGI wise, design wise, that troll in Harry Potter is annoying as hell. We'll get to.
All right, well, we're going to get to it right now. It's time to move on. Our final film of the year, the top grossing movie of 2001. Depending on what country you're from, you either know it as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the good old US of A. Currently has an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Lesson number 1, never be late to class. Lesson number 2, keep all chocolate frogs indoors.
Watch it.
Lesson number 3,
And most importantly of all,
avoid mountain trolls, goblins with attitude, and a 3-headed dog named Fluffy. Any questions? Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, rated PG.
This film was directed by Christopher Columbus with a screenplay by Steve Kloves. It's based on Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Less said about that, the better. It was released the 4th November, 2001 at the Odeon, which makes sense. The 10th November, 2001 in the United Kingdom wide, and the 16th of November, 2001 in the good old US of A. On a budget of $125 million, this film made $1.017 billion with a B. Little orphan Egghead is sent off to Magic Muppet boarding school where he makes new friends and finds old enemies.
The director of Home Alone takes She Who Must Not Be Named's book series to the big screen in epic fashion.
I love that. Oh, the movie that made me want to be a wizard so bad.
Okay, let me start here because I've already talked about this movie, and then I'm going to turn it over to you two all-timers. Steven Spielberg was originally scheduled to direct this movie. He wanted to direct it. He kind of was one pushing for the project. And this was his quote. And I have a complicated relationship with Spielberg at this point. It all changed for me when Shia LaBeouf came out. If you guys remember this, when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was coming out. And Shia LaBeouf was on the press circuit saying, this movie's no good. And he said in one of the press junkets, he was like, I love the Indiana Jones movies, but this one's no good. And I'm actually like, I don't think I'm good in it. I think it was kind of embarrassing. This is before the movie came out. And he said, it was like, what was it like to work with Spielberg? And he's like, I always wanted to work with him. He's really a hero of mine. But when I told him the movie was no good, he said, I know, but sometimes you just have to sell the car. That was Spielberg's answer to him. And because LaBeouf didn't, problematic, whatever with him aside, didn't even want to do the press junket for the movie because he didn't believe in the project. He thought the finished project stunk. And Spielberg said, I know this movie's no good. You still got to sell it. This was his quote about Harry Potter. It's shooting ducks in a barrel. It's just a slam dunk. It's just like withdrawing $1 billion and putting it into your personal bank account. There's no challenge. He ended up not directing it because he didn't want to acquiesce a certain level of creative control to J.K. Rowling, who at the time was like, if you're going to adapt my movies, I'll sign the contract, but my lawyer's going to put in that. I'm going to tell you what the fuck to do with because she wasn't done writing the books yet. So this film for the March 24th, 2002, 74th Academy Awards was nominated for Best Art Direction, for which it lost, Best Costume Design, for which it lost, and Best Original Score, for which it lost. My first time watch of this film was all the way back on episode 130, or not even 100, episode 34. That's over 110 episodes ago. And here's what I'll say. Robert, I'm going to speak your language. My appreciation for this franchise and this movie has only grown thanks to a certain visit to Universal Studios, Florida, because the frozen butterbeer bypassed my brain and went straight to my heart. Kat, have you ever had frozen butterbeer? Holy shit. I don't know what that shit is. I've had it hot, I've had it cold, whatever. The frozen butterbeer in the fucking subtropical temperatures of Orlando parking lot, Florida is amazing. The Diagon Alley recreation, the Hogwarts Express, the fucking bar, the tavern that my boy Robbie Coltrane takes Harry Potter in. I had bread pudding in there, which was delicious, by the way. I've eaten giant turkey legs. I didn't give a shit about Harry Potter. The books came out when I was already kind of past the age, and it didn't hit my. It was like the people about 3 years younger than me were like the people it really hit. So I didn't give a shit about this movie. The first time I watched the movie, I didn't give a shit about it, but I didn't even want to rewatch it. But when I rewatched it, I was like, I've been there. I've been there. I've been to that wand shop. I've been to Diagon Alley. I've been in that bank vault. I've been in, I've seen that troll. Or the dwarf or that goblin or this, that, whatever. And I like this movie now just because of a theme park attraction at
Universal Studios, Florida. Premiering in Orlando, May 1990. Come see the stars and ride the movies.
The Hogwarts Express is such a cool little, because it's really just, it's not even a ride. It's literally just like to get you from one side of the park to the other, because they fucked up in the planning of it. They're like, Harry Potter Land is in 2 different places. And they're like, okay, we got to get you from one place to the other. And they put an LED screen in a window and have a frog jump around. But it's so cool. I loved it. I love Universal Studios Florida, and the Harry Potter stuff is out of this world. Out of this world. So now I like this movie better. That's 100% my take. I didn't wear a robe. I didn't get a wand. I didn't do any of that. Kat, do you have a robe?
I don't have a robe.
Do you have a wand?
Nope.
Wow.
But I will say, recently, I don't know why I just got this wanted to, I guess, nostalgia. I was like, I really want to build Legos, you know? So I was like, I've always wanted to, I always kept seeing the Dumbledore castle or the Hogwarts castle. So like in succession, like last Christmas, last December, I was like, I'm going to buy all the Lego sets. So I bought like the little, the flying car one, and then my husband got me the castle one. But then I saw this like Lego builder who does his own custom one and built like all of Hogwarts, and I'm like, I don't know if I'll get to that level because I would be like, I don't have the time for it. But I've been really obsessed with that one. And so I'll speak to more about that. But yeah, I don't have any of the, but I do have a lot of like little things. Like my mom will still get me Harry Potter things. My friends will, like, it's just one of those kind of things. Like, I don't know. It's just it's sort of like Lord of the Rings. It was very foundational, and I can't believe thinking about it. Like I got Harry Potter, the first one, and Lord of the Rings,
same year.
The first film, all in the same year at the age of 13. yeah, all at the same. And I remember the buildup for those because I remember really liking the book. I was in 4th grade when I read the book, and then so this would have been 3 years later. So like imagine like reading something and then being like, oh my god, they're making it. And so it was just like an explosion of nerdness, like wizardry and different realms. And I don't think I ever compared them in a way. Like I never thought like, oh, I'm only going to be Lord, like sort of like NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. I was like, I never chose one. Like I liked both of them. And I don't think at least in my realm, people weren't like, oh, if you like Lord of the Rings, you can't like Harry Potter. I think we were still in that age where we could like both, or I think more people probably liked Harry Potter my age, and then like they had to grow to like Lord of the Rings or not. Because I feel like there's always conversations around like Harry Potter was more of like but it's just so different. Like it's not, you can't even really compare them.
Well, the only comparison that anybody ever drew for me was there was a girl in high school who was a little bit younger than me, and she congratulated me on seeing the Lord of the Rings, and she was like, that's good that you saw that. And I was like, this, I didn't really know this person, so that was really weird. I was like, why? And she was like, because Harry Potter has magic in it, but I was like, yeah, but Lord of the Rings has magic in it. And she was like, yeah, but Lord of the Rings is God magic. It's a Christian novel. So that's good because it's actually God is behind that, the source behind the magic that's in that book, which is in that movie. And Harry Potter, because it's witchcraft, it's demonic.
Has exposed certain things like rock and roll music, Dungeons and Dragons, marijuana, and even the New Age movement. And now we feel there's another attack upon our society. If I say something like wicked witches and demon clouds and spell books and even the zone of eternal evil, what comes to mind? What do you think of? Do you think of a coven of witches or a seance? Watch now.
Wicked witches? Demon clouds? Where do we start, Mr. Van Gool?
You start by getting that spell book before those foolish witches destroy the world.
We've got some witches to splat.
You coming with us, Mr. V? I'm afraid I cannot.
Like we're not into witches either, sir. We'll stick with you.
If you wish, I'm going to hunt down that demon mist in the zone of eternal evil where the darkest spirits are trapped.
Like on second thought, send us a postcard.
Weren't there were also like parents groups like, banning Harry Potter and all that stuff, and it's the bad. Yeah, there was a whole thing with that too.
There are a lot of people out there right now who are saying, oh, here go those Christians again. They're on another soapbox. Why should Christian parents be concerned about a film that's being sort of touted as harmless?
Here we have a wizard, Harry Potter, a witch, who goes to school with 350 other students to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, which has been repackaged as a reading incentive program promoted by Scholastic Inc., the publishers, in our schools. 32 million children a year are being reached by witchcraft repackaged.
Hey, but if my kids are just going to enjoy this and they're not engaging in the practice of any of this, what's the harm?
Well, the harm is, first of all, that witchcraft is being normalized to our children. For the first time in the history of the world, witchcraft is being given to children in a children's format, and children are seeing other children practicing it and say it's all right.
Have you been to Diagon Alley? Have you put on a robe? Have you drank the butter beer?
I've drank the butter beer. I've been to Diagon Alley. I've not put on a robe. I don't have.
Yeah, we're gonna buy that.
The wands are like a couple $100.
Yeah, they're crazy. So my introduction to this movie, and by extension this franchise, I was again working. All my answers go back to AMC. I was working at AMC, and I remember like opening weekend or whatever with this movie. I was working concession, and I'd have people come up like dressed in the robes with the scar on their all the glasses and all that. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what is, because I had heard of these books, but not really. And so I eventually checked it out, and you know, again, I was 18 years old. I have a younger brother who's 8 years younger than me, so he's basically the same age as Daniel Radcliffe in this movie. So he was on to the books, and those were like his favorite movies. I think he was Harry Potter for Halloween, like the following year, or like one of those. So it was something that was a big in my household. So when I watched this for the first time, I immediately like, oh, okay, I get it. This is like the Wizard of Oz kind of wish fulfillment fantasy, like entering another world sort of thing. Like the Diagon Alley, the brick wall sort of peeling back feels very much to me like Dorothy stepping out of the house and everything goes from black and white to color sort of thing. So I appreciated it that way as sort of a modern mythology. And it does, it's funny that these two movies came out so close together because they are both fantasy, but they're also both very different, like in the audiences that they target. Like this is the closest thing I would say the last couple of decades has to the way the Star Wars trilogy raised a generation of people in the 70s and 80s and ongoing from there. I did the Star Wars movies on Cricket Table podcast years ago, and then the following year I did the Harry Potter movies, but for that reason. And so you have to sort of, I think, grade this movie a bit on a curve because it puts child performances at such at the forefront.
So cute.
Hermione. Woo, boy. I don't know how cute's the word I would use.
She does, but like, but if you look at like I'll let Robert finish.
She stinks.
No, and I was gonna say before we start getting into all that, and I think Chris Columbus, limited in scope filmmaker that he may be, like he deserves a lot of credit that he probably doesn't get for overseeing all of this. That John Williams music, and the way that the world looks, the tone, everything, like so much of this, he has to create a foundation and take those words and make them she who must not be named words and bring them to life in a way that struck a chord with most people. That this became the predominant film franchise for a decade out thereafter. So I think it's important to kind of give him his props.
I think the imaginative world that he builds, though, is so excellently executed that it makes perfect sense to me that millions of young kids in 2001 would be obsessed with this film and would spend any amount of money to visit it in Florida and to dress like these characters and be these characters and be a part of this world. Because the thing is, it's not just that certain people are magic or certain people are God, devil magic, I should say. It's that the world itself is magic. The world of Hogwarts and all the surrounding, like once you get on that train, everything is magic. The candy you eat is magic. Everything's magic. Everything is whimsical. And we, as the series progresses, and even as this movie progresses, Kat, like you were saying, that magic also has a dark side, and there's danger and there's risk, and I think that's what's really interesting is the movie, and therefore presumably the book, doesn't present like magic, even though these are kids, as a good force or even a neutral force. It can be like the whole thing with like the mirror.
Yeah.
Where it's like, he's just like, you can never look at this mirror again. I'm going to take it away from you because you'll waste away. It was like just to have the idea of these kids are going to go to wizard school and rather just be like silly and hijinks, which there is some of that. It's like, and also if you say this spell wrong, you will fucking die and you'll burn in hell forever. It's like, and the movie doesn't really shy away from that, right? It doesn't really shy away that like there's a dark side to all of this. And there's real risk, and these kids are in real peril. and there's real danger here, and they will kill kids as this story progresses. And that's a really kind of a weird. It's almost like Wizard of Oz Return to Oz. It's like it's very odd, like. Especially because it's Chris Columbus, and it's just sort of like there's John Cleese is I'm a headless ghost in the cafeteria. Oh, the dining hall. And then by the end of it, you're like, I got Voldemort in my head and I'm gonna kill you. And it's just like, what the fuck?
Well, recently it started in the pandemic. I used to revisit these a lot, but not the whole series all in one go. I would maybe watch this first one a lot because I have a soft spot for the first ones, especially this one feels it's very magical and it's lighthearted because it's not he's still discovering who he is, and he's getting that the letter to Hogwarts, and we are kind of discovering magic with him along with Harry, as opposed to the other characters who are so lived in and they like already have their world. And then there's like the Christmas, and there's a little bit of like it's like a sort of like Nightmare Before Christmas. You're like it's a little bit like you can do it in October, watch it in October, but also it extends through December. But like during the pandemic, for some reason, I was watching the things that were comforting for me, as opposed to like new things. And one of the series that I revisited was Harry Potter, and I thought it would be Lord of the Rings, like, oh, Lord of the Rings, I hold it to, whatever. And I found that I actually, didn't revisit Lord of the Rings as much during the pandemic. I was watching Harry Potter, and ever since then, like 2020, I have been like I'll take like a month or two in between, but then I'll just start Harry Potter and like watch it, and I'll watch them like 1 through whatever 8, like over and over again, like in a 3-month span, like just like constant. Like when the 8th one stops, I put the first one, and like sometimes I was like, what are you doing? But so in that, I feel like I've seen, like, I think I have more of an appreciation for it as well, because I think I used to see it as something that was like, oh, it's just, magic, whatever, it's kind of like a kid's thing that I watched and I'm nostalgic for it. But as every time I watch it, I find something new. The world is very layered. And like that Spielberg comment where he was like, oh, it would be like a cash, like a for sure thing. I think that kind of discredits Chris Columbus is like, it's sort of like when someone makes a pilot episode, like they are setting the tone. If they don't set the tone correctly, it could go off the rails. And then like everyone else after that has to course correct. So I think like, while they would have had a built-in audience, because of all the like the books, I don't think they would have stayed. And we've seen that with other YA magical things, like like the Narnia one, like that didn't continue. It wasn't a shoe-in. And so it does, like, I think people don't give the Harry Potter franchise enough credit, I think, for what, like, it seems easy because of what they were able to do and all the money, and they kind of like maybe allude like, oh, well, it was like the kids that go and the parents that had to take them or whatever. But I mean, there is staying power. Like I've seen people also re-binging these, like I have, and like there's a reason for that. Like, yeah, maybe they made their money in the first go in the first theater 20 years ago, but like, why do I continue to watch these movies? Like, and it's some, like, I've been trying to figure this out. So it's funny when this episode came up, because I was like, oh, I've been watching this over and over again. What is it about this first movie that I love so much? Why does it still, stand that test of time? And it just captures a moment so well. I think that like those 90s movies did, which, I mean, he did Home Alone 2, which is also something I revisit every year. So there is something, well, maybe it's basic, whatever. Chris Columbus really has that formula for getting like, just having like a feel good movie, which I think some of those movies oftentimes get kind of demeaned in a way because they're not complicated or they're not whatever. But if any filmmaker tries to do that, it's not easy. And we've seen it fail. Like they don't capture the vibe. Like, you mentioned vibe earlier in one of the other movies. It's really hard to nail like a simple, very like feel good movie. And then in this one, also having to build like the franchise, but not knowing whether it was going to continue on. And I do, every time I revisit these, going from the first one that's kind of lighthearted but has a little bit of darkness, and then where we end up, which it's such a nice progression. You see like the kid actors, they really like come into their own over the course of the series and things like that. And you go back to this first one where they're just like, trying to say their lines, but there's something magical about that too. So I don't, and also from like a kid's perspective, the fact that like there's no adults, there's adults there, but like the kids aren't treated as like just kids, like sometimes they are, but they are the ones taking control of their lives. They're like getting credit for, they're getting into these plots and things. And I love that, I think, growing up. And every time I see it, I'm like, oh, it's so interesting. Like how I think that's why kids gravitated towards it and still do, because it's one of the only kind of things where there's not, I mean, now there's Stranger. It kind of maybe also is like a precursor to Stranger Things in a way, where kids were at the forefront of this property. But I don't know. I could say so many cool things about it. And I think it's the world building, it's the music, it's and looking, this one doesn't hold up as well as Lord of the Rings in terms of like production. Is that, there is like the CG Hogwarts castle in the back, but there's enough like balance of practical against like CG where you can like cling onto those, and also like the magical pumpkins and the candles and things, and you're like, oh, this is so cool. So it was enough whimsy for me to be, even at 13, where I knew like that stuff didn't exist, to be like, well, maybe it does, maybe I'm gonna get my Hogwarts letter. I still hope to this day, like I still get that. But I don't know, I love it so much, and I think there's a reason why it's so continues to be bingeable for me, like on repeat, to I don't know, my husband's like, why are you doing this again? Just like,
why are you doing this to me?
But I watch it on my own, like he's not watching it with me. But yeah, like it's just my craft movie. It's like, it's such a comfort movie, like even more so than Lord of the Rings. And I think that speaks to the power of this, beginning film, the first one.
Well, Lord of the Rings is kind of like thematically kind of low-key depressing, because it's like, hey, men are really fucking fragile and they're going to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
And
I was there when the race of men failed.
Yeah. And it's like,
jeez. Like,
me too. But I think what's so interesting, going back to what I was saying and kind of piggybacking off what you were saying, Kat, is that, and actually what you were saying too, Robert, is that we have to want to go to Hogwarts. How many of those other YA adaptations you're like, I don't want to be a fucking sorcerer's apprentice. I don't want to be a vampire's buddy or whatever the fuck. I don't want to be Percy Jackson in the God of Olympus. Yeah, I don't want to be in the Hunger Games, right? I don't want to offer myself as a tribute. Like I don't want to be a part of that world. But with this series of films, and in particular this one, it's like, you understand, especially as a kid, like, yeah, like I would want to, like, as scary at times as this is, the ghost and spooky castles and teachers that might be trying to kill you and whatnot.
I want to go to Diagon Alley.
Yeah, you want to go, like Hogwarts still seems there's enough whimsy and magic and fun there and affection there. And you want to be with Hagrid, rest in peace to Robbie Coltrane. It's like, oh, Hagrid's so cool. And, Richard Harris, rest in peace to him. Dumbledore. It's like, Dumbledore's like kind of this shady character, but he's also like this sort of very loving grandpa, but he's kind of an asshole. Like, I don't know. There's just, I guess your point is like, it's a deceptively complex world that is still, and even in this one film, that it has texture to it because of its complexity, but at the same time is escapist enough and hopeful enough that you still could see yourself wanting to be a part of it.
Yeah. And then watching this whole series over again, there's the little nuggets that you realize like they had to put in all of these movies, and it starts from the first one and you're like, whoa, that was amazing.
Which is, I think, boy, I'm taking shots today. But it's another reason why Diagon Alley and all the other parts of Harry Potter that are at Universal are everything that Galaxy's Edge wants to be. Because the fact of the matter is, other than the fact that stuff really looks worn and is kind of dirty and there's Muppets, there's really nothing to the worlds of Star Wars. Like, there's just like, okay, we're on this planet now. And it's like, okay, that looks kind of cool, but I don't want to be on that planet. I don't want to be on the fucking moon of Endor. I don't give a shit. I certainly don't want to be on Tatooine. I don't give a shit. It's okay. I saw a spaceship. I saw the Millennium Falcon. I like the Millennium Falcon. I like to be on inside of it, but that's about it. Like, but it's like, I don't give a shit. I didn't give a shit about these movies or in these books, but man, you stick me in the middle of the fucking bank and I'm like, oh man, there's a dragon up there. And when it blows fire, you feel it on your face down at the street level. And the weird crooked alleyways and the just weird little shit in the windows. It's like moving around and the magic and the what and the this and the that. And it's like, And again, the butter beer. I cannot stress this enough. The frozen goddamn butter beer. I drank it in January. Orlando is not that warm in January, FYI. But I'm just sort of like, yeah, give it to me frozen, baby. I just got off of Rat Bill's barges, Bluto's Rat Bill's barges in January. I'm soaking wet. Give me a frozen butter beer. I loved it, man. And that it synced for me, which is like this somehow, thanks to She Who Will Not Be Named and the adaptation of this movie, it builds a world that you want to be a part of that yet still somehow feels like it has stakes, which is very unique.
And that music, the theme music. Oh,
yeah. John Williams did it again. This fucking guy, he did it again. You're sort of like, because here's the thing, even when I didn't care about Harry Potter, I couldn't deny that little tune and all of his music is really good.
Yeah.
It's like Jaws, Star Wars, Superman, Harry Potter. It's like, holy shit. Robert, Diagon Alley, frozen butter beer. You
Good
prefer
stuff.
Percy Jackson. Let's hear what you have to say.
No, I to first of all, to Kat's point earlier, the way that Chris Columbus directs these first two, it's just like it's like a warm blanket. He sends you out with the warm fuzzies. Both of these movies, this one and its sequel, end on a Hagrid note. This one ends with him waving the train off, and the second one ends with Hagrid's return to Hogwarts and everybody cheering and him getting all teary-eyed. And then the way I view this franchise, because like I said, I've covered these all in the past too. It's the way I see it is essentially the whole thing is like it's an allegory or metaphor for coming of age. So when this is the innocence of youth. This is when you're young, you're protected, you have all these people, all these adults looking out for you. Little by little, that all kind of chips away on Harry Potter till by the end, it's him facing Voldemort and him laying his own life on the line and all that. So I love it. Is
Voldemort puberty? Is Voldemort?
it's when you graduate.
Sure, it could be.
It's adulthood.
It's adulthood. It's the real world. Yeah, exactly. He's like, fine.
It's your debt collectors. It's actually, it's the federal government for your student loans going, I can touch you.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly. So it's like the promise, the possibility of what awaits you, as opposed to later it gets to the reality of things.
You know what? You guys are saying that, but you know what's actually the fact that like he goes to the vault and they're like, here's a bunch of money.
Oh my God, I love that
You have
part.
all the money you need. So all your
great.
bills are paid for. And he's like, I'm going to take all of this fucking gold in my pocket and buy all the candy on the trolley.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, he's got a fucking noseless ancient old man who's trying to like break his wand and molest him. And you're just like, oh yeah. But yeah, I think that's to your point is like, wouldn't we want to go back to where like somebody else has to pay all of our expenses?
Yeah.
And the
We're
kids
just like, what do you want to do with your money? I want candy. And it's like, okay, all right. Like your biggest decision is what candy do you eat? Yeah. I'm half being facetious, but I think both of you have struck on that. That's exactly right. Like this captures like this, because what I was saying is the world is dangerous, but like the adults are kind of keeping the danger at the edge. We're not really going to talk about that. Yeah, and you're right, Robert. They're kind of like, well, we're not really going to talk about that. And the other thing too is they're all keeping secrets from the kids of how dangerous the world really is and how bad and dark it really is.
And like you were saying about Dumbledore being an asshole, it's like at the end of almost all these movies, he's like, all right, Harry, here's the cards on the table. I should have told you this a long time ago.
But
this is what was really going on. Yeah.
But that's what growing up is, right? Then your mom's sort of like, well, turns out I was actually married before and I never told you. And,
right.
And it's just sort of like, wait, what? Because parents with the obligation to hide the nasty parts of history and the world for their children.
And you have your friends are your family and you do everything. You're, as much as like the adults are the secrets or whatever, the kids are also, they're like, oh, we know better. And like, I thought I knew better, and then you realize you don't. And then it kind of comes to a head at the end. But yeah, so it's just like, it's such a.
And then the girl you should have married ends up marrying your best friend and you don't even see each other hardly ever.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, Harry Potter, we just uncovered the secret of the Philosopher and Sorcerer's Stone. It's our childhood that it reminds me of, and innocence and the threat of the loss of innocence thanks to puberty. Robert brought that all together. Voldemort is your burgeoning sexuality. Okay. Robert, this is going to be your number 3 if my calculations are correct.
It is.
What's the score?
At third with an 8.1. It gets a really strong start to this franchise. I think there are better chapters ahead. But like I said, Chris Columbus lays so much groundwork. The kid performances are overall fine to whatever. I think, but they have a charisma even at this age. I mean, I think Emma Watson, Daniel Radcliffe, and some of the other kid actors have a charisma that they then learn how to, to a certain point that you can learn how to act, but you have to, the charisma is sort of innate. And I think they have that already at this point. And they balance it out by surrounding them with Richard Harris, Maggie Smith, Alan Rickman, some of the best actors to ever do it. And so that I think this movie, the effects, some of them are a little bit dodgy.
That troll, but it looks like
we mentioned. Yeah,
but I kind of love it now. I'm like, oh, that's so bad, but I'm like, you know what? It's like, whatever.
There's also like the rubber people thing that you see, like even in the original Spider-Man, which came out the year after this, like when Neville's on the broomstick and he's like all rubbery. There's an air of kind of Scooby-Dooiness to this franchise, which I think is really fun. So they're like mysteries first and foremost, but set in a magical world. The first one also is kind of bogged down by having to do so much of the exposition where I feel like half of Daniel Radcliffe's performance has been like, what is that? And who are these people? And where am I? And what is going on?
What am I?
But that's the audience as well. Like, where are we? What are we doing?
It is.
It's true.
It's almost faithful to the novel to a fault where you can like set your watch to, and the chapter change happens right there. And then that's chapter 2, Quidditch. Chapter 3 is this or whatever. Like it's so, linear in that way, which later on they sort of learn to grow beyond that and be a little more creative with their adaptations. But I think it's a really strong start.
Yeah. Another coming of age movie for me, because I loved Oliver, the Quidditch dude. I was like, loved him so much. Yeah, big crush. Cool.
You weren't a Rupert Grint fan?
No, I think they were like friends for me. I didn't maybe as he got older a little bit, like towards the end, I was like, oh, okay, maybe the redhead thing, but and then like Harry, I think Harry did a good job of just being like, like the friend, that kind of thing. Because I think if he was like the leading, because there was always the supporting characters, like there's like the Cedric in the fourth one where like those that you kind of fall in love with and then they hurt you a little bit more, because if you had that feeling with Harry, I think it wouldn't have worked as much.
Well, the other thing too is like Harry, as the film progresses, kind of becomes kind of a shithead.
Because he starts complaining all the time, and I don't know.
Just like
it's funny because one of those movies, it's like also it is very much like a, like you were saying, the childhood passage, because one of the movies, like they're all just like teenagers, but I think I was at the same age. They were like, they had the emo haircut, but I think I was at the same point as them, so you don't notice it. And then when I look back now, I'm like, because the fourth one's actually not my favorite, and like my husband loves it because that's a dragon one, but I was like, I always look back and I'm like, and then I know now it's because they're all teenagers whining. I'm like, ugh. Like,
all right, so this is, if my math is correct, this is also your number 3, Kat?
Yes, it is, and I have it as an 8.5.
All right, well, I have yet to reveal my score, so let's do it in the recap. Let's start at my number 5. The worst of the week is, for me, Shrek with an 8.0. Kat gave it a 6.5. It's also her worst of the week. So we're ways away there. And I'm still somehow above RYJ, who gave it a 7.5. So we all agree it's the worst of the week, right?
And the fact that that's not even, like, our ratings are pretty decent considering that's the worst of the week. These are 5 arguably good movies, varying degrees of good, but
you could have been here last week when we covered Planet of the Apes and Hannibal and a bunch more shit. Okay, coming in at number 4 for me is Harry Potter. It's my number 4. I give it an 8.0 out of 10. That's 5 points away from Kat. It's your number 3. You gave it an 8.5 out of 10. And then Robert, an 8.1. So you and I, we're all kind of aligned, but you and I, Robert, are the most aligned. My number 3 is actually Monsters, Inc., which I give an 8.5 to. That is your number 4, Kat, 8.0. And your number 4, Robert, 8.0. So we're pretty close there. That puts me at my number, we're at what, 2, I think? My number 2 is Ocean's 11, which I give an 8.75 out of 10. Kat gave it a 9 out of 10. That's her number 2 as well. But Robert's number 1 is Ocean's 11 with a 9.25. So we're all right. Again, same range, slightly different placement. And then that brings us, of course, to The Lord of the Rings, which is my number 1, which I give a 9.02, which is 8 points lower than Kat, who made it her number 1, which is a 9.8, which is 2 points lower than Robert, who gave it a 9.2 and made it his number 2. So if I had to select whose ranking, this is really fucking hard because they're really close.
Yeah.
Whose ranking list I most agree with? Shit.
So close yet so far.
1, 2, 4, 3, 3.
I mean, do you give more weight to the first ones we agreed on?
Or do I give more weight to the 6.5 versus the 8?
Yeah.
Or the 9.8 versus the 9. But when I'm right there with Robert, the 9.2, damn. See, and Robert and I are, what you gave Harry Potter, what, 8.1, Robert?
Yeah.
I gave it an 8.0.
Oof.
Oh, boy. I think that I would almost have to, I almost have to side with Robert, but with this exception. Our number 1 and number 2 are pretty far apart, and here's why. 9.25 versus 8.75. Doesn't seem like it's that far off, but that's like a whole, what would that be?
0.5.
Yeah, 0.5, half point off, which is a pretty big deal when you're talking about 1 versus 2, right?
Right.
So an 8.75 versus a 9.25, when my highest score of the week is only a 9, that's Lord of the Rings. I think being added to the guest list is Robert's Ocean's 11, and being added to the short list is Kat's Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to go with Robert.
I thought so too, because Robert and I are pretty close, but the most important thing is that number 1, and that's where we're the farthest apart. That's the only place where we actually kind of diverge from each other, score-wise.
Right.
This is a tough one, though. Those first 2 are just, they're so good in their own ways. Like, it's just.
Yeah. So that means Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone eliminated from cinematic history again. Shrek eliminated from cinematic history again. Monsters, Inc. eliminated from cinematic history. Which brings us to Ocean's 11 and Lord of the Rings. And I will give you an update here in one quick second of what, because this is the final episode before Last Movie Standing Spring Blast. So that means our guest list is Matt F. Basler's choice, which is Police Academy from the Police Academy franchise. Sam from Movie Reviews and 20Q's choice of Sudden Death, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. Billy from We Watch a Thing said that the best Tarantino movie of all time is Reservoir Dogs. Brad from the Cinema Guys said that the best movie from the top grossing movies of 2001, 10 through 6 was Pearl Harbor. And RYJ says the best movie from the top 5 highest grossing films of 2001 is Ocean's 11. Police Academy, Sudden Death, Reservoir Dogs, Pearl Harbor, Ocean's 11.
I feel pretty good about
that
Ocean's
was
11's
good.
chances there. I'm just saying.
I think that's a no-brainer.
Which means now we're going to go over to my short list, which I chose Police Academy 3. I don't remember the subtitle. I also chose Sudden Death. I chose Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as the greatest Tarantino movie ever made. And of the bottom 5 top 10 grossing films of 2001, I chose Jurassic Park 3.
There's no good choice in that batch.
No.
No.
And I agree with Kat. We both love the same thing. As a old school convert, old school disciple of Peter Jackson versus a new convert in the Church of the Shire, the Fellowship of the Ring. What will our competitors decide? Who will our competitors be? You just have to tune in to find out. It is Last Movie Standing, Season 7.1, Spring Blast, coming soon to a podcast near you, right here at Binge Movies. Kat, Robert, get your plugs in. I've kept you here for 7.5 long hours.
The extended cut.
I was just about to make that joke. Kat beat me to it.
Yeah. What do we think of this movie year, and where can we find you guys? What are you up to on the internet?
Yes, it was a nostalgic blast going back to 2001. Lots of feelings, lots of good crop, and it was a good. I'm always on a good crop with you guys. I've never been like in a bad one. You gotta bring me back when there's like kind of a shitty. Yeah, I loved it. Thanks for taking me back to 2001. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Things Cat Loves.
Yeah, what do you do in the world of creation? What do you create? Where are you writing? Where are you podcasting? What movies are you working on? What do you got going on?
Yeah, I'm a little bit. Yeah, I just finished Sundance, so you'll find reviews a little bit all over the place. My usual ones, Shuffle, Latinx Lens, various places, but yeah, all over the place.
Gotcha. Robert, what about you, man? You've relaunched your podcast last year, kind of switched some formats, and now you're doing franchise detours and you're producing 50 million different things. What do you got going on? Where should people find you? What are you most excited about?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. And like I said, I think this was an interesting year. It really contextualized how 2001 was like the cross section where now everything is starting to be more CG. Everything is more franchise driven. And you can really kind of see the seeds of that with Harry Potter, with Lord of the Rings, with Shrek. Where everything is heading, again, for better or worse. And I host for Crooked Table Productions. I have Close Watch, where we get to know our guests through the movies they love. Where I'm actually doing a movie musical theme this year. So by the time this goes live, people will be able to hear at least Little Shop of Horrors, which I'm recording actually tomorrow as of this recording. And then I have In the Heights in the works as West Side Story. I have a bunch of other ones that are in the hopper, have yet to be recorded. And then for franchise detours, where we believe no movie series travels in a straight line. The next mega series I'm doing is Planet of the Apes. Jason, we need to talk and schedule that. We're gonna get you on there somewhere.
Yep.
And then we're doing X-Men later this summer, which talk about a franchise that like is all over the place. So that people can find both of those shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, and other podcatchers, as well as crookedtable.com. And I'm on Twitter at Crooked Table.
Support, leave them stars, all the places you need to leave them stars. Give them money if you can, subscribe, all that stuff. Smash like buttons, do everything you're supposed to do to support independent creators. These are two of the all-time greatest guests in the history of Binge Movies. And I'm so glad I got you both on in this new season, in the new year. And we'll have to do it again in the not too distant future. Until next time, binge on.
She's not a Christian!
She could be a Jew and believe in God.
It doesn't matter. She's tampering in dark-sided stuff. Yes, she did. The entire house is dark-sided.
She said her whole house is...
She is dark-sided too. Gargoyles, psychics, everything's ungodly. Dark-sided.
I'm glad you're home.
Get the hell out of my house. In Jesus' name, I pray.